Chapter 1. Whispers in the Hollow. In the small, isolated town of Ashridge Hollow, the autumn wind carried a chill that cut through the heart of every resident. The leaves had turned brittle, falling in shades of red and brown, carpeting the ground like a bed of forgotten memories. The sky, perpetually overcast, cast an eerie, muted glow over the town, where the sun never seemed to rise fully and shadows lingered longer than they should. The hollow itself, nestled between two jagged hills, had always felt apart from time. A place where the clock ticked slower, where the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. It was here, on the outskirts of the town, where old houses leaned on one another, their windows boarded up, doors creaking on rusted hinges. The hollow was avoided, spoken of in hushed tones. Yet, no one ever left. There, hidden behind gnarled trees and thickets, stood the Crowther Manor. Its silhouette loomed against the sky, a crumbling relic of an era long past. The structure, once grand, had become a withered corpse of a house, its stone walls cracked, ivy weaving through the fractured stone like veins. The roof sagged, giving the impression that the manor was slowly bowing to the weight of secrets buried deep within its foundation. Every Halloween, the air around the manor grew colder, as if the house itself exhaled the chill. This year, though, something felt different. It began when the townsfolk heard the whispers, faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to seep through the trees and curl through the narrow alleys like smoke. Some swore the whispers were carried by the wind, while others believed they came from beneath the soil, rising like steam from the underworld. No one dared to investigate. An old farmer, named Harold Fisher, had been the first to notice. While tending to his fields on the edge of the hollow, he sensed a presence behind him, a chill that slithered down his spine and rooted his feet to the ground. He turned slowly, expecting to find a stray dog or perhaps a raccoon, but instead, he saw nothing but the swaying branches of the oaks. Yet, the air seemed thicker there, as though something unseen pressed against his chest. That night, as he lay in bed, Harold heard the whispers more clearly, scratching at the edges of his mind, filling his dreams with images of darkened hallways and figures shifting in the shadows. The following morning, Harold's fields were covered in strange symbols, spirals and jagged lines etched into the earth as if by claws. He left town without a word, abandoning his home, and by evening, his house stood as empty as the others. The whispers grew louder after his departure, and the townspeople, one by one, began to feel the cold. Across the hollow, strange things began to happen. Dogs, normally restless, refused to bark, huddling in corners with wide, frightened eyes. Children stopped playing near the woods, drawn back by a sense of dread they couldn't articulate. Birds no longer sang. Instead, they gathered on power lines, watching with beady eyes as if awaiting some unspeakable event. Then, the fog came. It rolled in one evening, thick as a shroud, swallowing the streets and muffling the sounds of everyday life. It swirled through the town, blurring the edges of reality, casting the houses and lampposts in strange, distorted shapes. Inside the fog, the whispers seemed to multiply, echoing off every wall, weaving through every branch. On the second night of the fog, a widow named Margaret Tully ventured into the hollow. Drawn by a shadow she glimpsed moving beyond her window. She carried a lantern, the flame flickering wildly as she walked deeper into the woods. Her footsteps crunched against the dry leaves, each sound swallowed quickly by the dense mist. She reached the edge of the Crowther Manor, where she found the front gate ajar, swinging back and forth with a soft, rhythmic creak. Margaret hesitated, her breath misting in the cold air, the whispers brushing against her ears like a caress. Her lantern's glow barely pierced the darkness beyond the gate, revealing only a tangle of dead rose bushes and the manor's gaping doorway. Something moved within, too quick to discern, but there, nonetheless. The shadow pulled her forward, a compulsion she couldn't explain, until she crossed the threshold of the manor and disappeared into the night. By morning, her lantern was found at the manor's doorstep, its glass shattered, the flame long extinguished. Her footprints led inside, but no footprints came back out. The town's fear deepened. Doors were locked tight, windows shuttered against the swirling fog. The whispers, however, grew bolder, seeping into every corner of the town. They clung to the air like a curse, unraveling sanity thread by thread. And amidst this mounting terror, the Crowther Manor remained, a silent sentinel, its empty windows staring down upon the hollow like unblinking eyes. But beneath the manor's crumbling facade, something had awakened. Hidden behind layers of rotting wood and ancient stone, a presence began to stir, stretching from its long slumber. It moved through the darkened halls, where dust settled in thick layers, and crept down into the earth below, where the soil churned with memories of forgotten rituals and sacrifices made in the name of darkness. The hollow grew colder, as though the town's heart was being consumed from within. And as Halloween night approached, the whispers reached a fevered pitch, filling the air with a low, rhythmic pulse, like the beating of a heart buried beneath the ground, a heart that belonged to no living thing. In the darkness of their homes, the townspeople clutched their blankets tight, listening to the sounds that crept through their walls. They prayed the whispers would pass, that the fog would lift, and that whatever stalked the hollow would remain in the shadows. But the Crowther Manor loomed, waiting, as the night stretched longer, promising that something far worse than whispers had come to life in Ashridge Hollow. The hollow waited, patient and hungry, as the final leaves drifted to the earth. And somewhere within the fog, unseen eyes watched, biding their time, eager for the feast that would come with the setting of the sun. Chapter 2. The Unseen Gate. The fog had settled over Ashridge Hollow like a suffocating blanket, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. As dusk bled into night, the town took on an unsettling quiet, the kind that made the wind sound louder as it hissed through the cracks in old wood and rattled loose shutters. It was as though the hollow itself held its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. But all that came was the ever-present whispering, slipping between the cracks in the boarded windows, curling around doorways, and seeping through the walls like an invisible plague. By now, every resident knew better than to venture out after dark. Even the bravest among them, those who had once scorned the tales of shadows lurking at the edge of the woods, had grown wary. The hollow's fog twisted through the streets, creating the illusion of shapes moving just beyond the corner of one's vision. Things that never quite solidified, but always seemed to hover on the brink of reality. Near the edge of town, a rickety iron gate marked the entrance to the old cemetery. It had been years since anyone had been buried there. Most of the town's dead lay beneath crumbling headstones, some so weathered that the names had long since faded. Yet, the gate itself had remained untouched, rusted but sturdy, a barrier between the living and the secrets buried deep in the earth. Now, the cemetery gate swung open. No one knew who had unlocked it, but there it stood, its iron bars yawning wide like a mouth welcoming the fog inside. The wind picked up, carrying with it the brittle leaves that skittered across the gravestones, scraping like skeletal fingers. And beneath that, a new sound joined the whispers, a deep, rhythmic creak, like the sound of a breath drawn in slow, labored intervals. Beyond the gate, the cemetery stretched into the gloom, its paths winding like veins through rows of headstones. Between the graves, the fog coiled, dense and white, swirling into shapes that seemed almost human before dissipating back into formless mist. It was here that the old stone mausoleums, long abandoned by the living, stood as silent sentinels. Each one bore the marks of time, cracks snaking across their surfaces, ivy weaving through gaps, and moss creeping up from the ground as if to reclaim what had been taken. No one had set foot in the cemetery for years, but now signs of movement appeared. The grass, once wild and overgrown, lay flattened in places as if something had trampled through it. Footprints too large to be human pressed into the soil, deep impressions that cut through the soft earth. A broken lantern, glass cracked and oil leaking into the grass, lay discarded near one of the mausoleums, its flame long extinguished but its wick still wet. Beneath the earth, the roots of ancient trees twisted through the burial grounds, reaching deeper than any living thing had a right to. The ground had begun to shift, pulling downward, as though something far below clawed its way up. In the air, the whispers grew louder, no longer content to remain distant, but now clawing at the ears of those who dared listen. There was a pattern to them, a strange, rhythmic cadence that suggested intent, though its meaning remained lost to those above the soil. Inside the cemetery, an old oak tree stood near the center, its trunk gnarled and twisted, limbs stretching toward the sky like desperate fingers. The tree's roots dug deep into the earth, entwined with the bones of the forgotten. Its bark bore strange marks, deep gouges that no animal could have made, and strange symbols that looked older than the town itself. Beneath its canopy, the ground seemed to breathe, rising and falling as though the earth itself had begun to heave. It was there that something stirred, a shape barely visible, darker than the shadows that surrounded it, slithered between the headstones. Its form shifted with the fog, bending and stretching like a reflection in a broken mirror. The ground beneath it rippled, and the air grew colder, crystallizing the edges of the leaves with frost. It moved without sound, only the faint rustle of disturbed grass and the low murmur of whispers marking its presence. That night, the cemetery became a place of restless movement. The fog thickened, pooling around the mausoleums, flowing into every crack and crevice as if seeking entrance. The ancient stone doors shuddered under the weight of something unseen, trembling as if they might burst open and release whatever had long been sealed inside. Near the edge of the cemetery, a black cat slipped through the iron gate, its eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. It moved cautiously, drawn by an instinct it could not resist, weaving between the gravestones until it reached the base of the old oak. Its fur bristled as it approached the shifting ground, a low growl vibrating in its throat. The whispers swirled around it, filling the night air with their unintelligible murmurs, a language that spoke of things buried deep, of secrets that could never remain hidden. The cat hissed, backing away from the tree as the earth began to split open beneath its paws. A crack snaked through the roots, splitting the ground like a wound. From the depths, a sickly, pale light spilled forth, casting the cemetery in an unnatural glow. The light pulsed, flickering like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, the whispers grew louder, their rhythm matching the beat of the light below. Somewhere beneath the soil, something ancient began to rise, drawn by the opening of the unseen gate, the gate that had held it back for so long. It had no name, no true form, but it was hungry, hungry for the warmth of the living, for the blood that pulsed in their veins, for the life that it had been denied for centuries. The fog thickened around the cemetery, hiding the pale glow from the sight of the town, yet the whispers reached beyond the iron gate, curling through the streets of Ashridge Hollow. They wove through windows, slipped beneath doors, and filled the air with a promise of darkness. Those who lay awake in their beds felt a pressure building in their skulls, a sense that the earth beneath their homes had begun to shift, as if some unseen tide was rising from below. By morning, the iron gate stood closed once more, the fog retreating to the shadows, and the whispers fell silent, leaving the town with a strange, uneasy quiet. But the ground in the cemetery remained disturbed, the crack beneath the oak still glowing faintly with a sickly light that refused to fade. And the shadows that had stirred within the fog, those dark, twisting shapes, were no longer content to remain hidden. They hovered at the edge of the hollow, waiting for the night to fall again, waiting for the gate to open wider, eager for what lay beyond the surface. Chapter 3: A Veil of Shadows. Ashridge Hollow woke to a gray dawn, the light seeping through thick clouds like a pale, watery bruise across the sky. Yet, even in daylight, the fog lingered. It drifted between the houses and crawled along the cobblestone streets, casting everything in a soft, distorted haze. The town felt trapped in a twilight that never truly lifted, as if the sun itself was afraid to fully rise above the hollow. That morning, the residents went about their routines, but a new unease gnawed at their hearts. The air tasted of copper, sharp and metallic, clinging to their throats with each breath. There were no birds in the trees, no distant hum of insects, only the shuffling of feet on dew-damp ground and the slow groan of old wood under the weight of the mist. It was a silence that pressed in on all sides, a silence that seemed to listen. As they emerged from their homes, the townspeople found strange things in their yards and on their porches, small, unnatural tokens that hadn't been there the night before. Twisted bundles of sticks, bound together with strands of blackened twine, lay on doorsteps. Dead flowers, their petals withered and dry despite the dampness of the fog, were strewn across the walkways. Some discovered small claw marks scratched into the wood of their doors, marks that looked as though they'd been made by hands too thin, too bony, to belong to any living creature. No one spoke of these things. They simply gathered them into bags or swept them away, averted their eyes, and hurried back inside. But fear had taken root, spreading through the town like a sickness. It was a fear that drove their gazes toward the distant shape of Crowther Manor, barely visible through the veil of fog, its dark silhouette a reminder of the strangeness that now clung to their lives. Though no one dared to speak of it, all knew that whatever had come upon the hollow had seeped from that place, a poison from the heart of the old estate. Beyond the hollow's border, the woods had grown darker. The trees, once vibrant with autumn colors, now stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches twisted and bare. The underbrush, once thick with fallen leaves, was now flattened as if something heavy had passed through, pressing the life out of everything beneath it. Deep within the woods, near the forgotten cemetery, the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, shifting in ways that defied the gentle sway of the breeze. The cemetery remained undisturbed, save for the crack beneath the ancient oak tree, which had grown wider during the night. The pale, sickly light that seeped from below had dimmed, but it still cast an unnatural glow over the nearest headstones, turning the words engraved on them into faint, ghostly sigils. The air around the oak had grown colder, a chill that cut deeper than any winter wind, a chill that seemed to come from within the earth itself. It was there, amidst the headstones and the twisted roots, that something new began to take form. The shadows that had slithered through the cemetery now gathered at the edges of the crack, coalescing into a shape that was not quite solid, not quite real. It hovered in the mist, a form without clear boundaries, shifting and rippling like smoke caught in a breeze. And though it had no face, no eyes that could be seen, it turned its focus toward the town, as if marking the distance between itself and those who slumbered within their fragile homes. As the sun reached its highest point, though its light never fully pierced the fog, something stirred beneath the oak. The ground bulged, swelling as though the earth itself breathed, and a low rumble echoed through the roots, carrying with it a sound like the grinding of bones. From the crack in the earth, a thin, clawed hand pushed through, fingers long and skeletal, covered in a black, viscous substance that oozed into the soil. The hand paused, flexing its fingers as if testing the air, then withdrew, disappearing back into the depths. But the crack remained, wider now, pulsing with that same eerie, unnatural light. In the town, those who dared to leave their homes found the air growing colder by the hour. Frost began to creep along window panes, tracing intricate patterns that resembled the symbols found on the cemetery's ancient stones. The patterns seemed to shift when no one was looking, rearranging themselves into shapes that felt unsettlingly familiar, as though they whispered secrets just beyond comprehension. Some of the townsfolk, gripped by a nameless dread, retreated to the church at the center of Ashridge Hollow. It stood as a relic of better times, its stone walls stained with age and its steeple leaning slightly to one side. They lit candles and prayed silently beneath the watchful eyes of old, faded saints, but the church felt colder than ever, the flame of each candle flickering wildly as though struggling against a wind that came from nowhere. As night began to fall again, the fog thickened once more, rolling in like a tide to envelop the town. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices that slithered through the mist, blending with the sound of unseen footsteps crunching across the dead leaves. In the darkness, shadows gathered at the edge of the hollow, creeping closer to the town with each passing hour. They moved through the fog like living things, slipping between the trees and pressing themselves against the windows of the homes, leaving faint, smudged outlines that evaporated as soon as the light touched them. Inside Crowther Manor, the air grew colder still, as though the heart of winter had come to nest within its crumbling walls. The shadows there moved differently, circling the manor's halls, weaving through rooms where dust lay thick and undisturbed. They seemed to be drawn to the cellar, where the floor had begun to shift, cracking open to reveal ancient stone steps that led downward, deep into the bowels of the earth. The townspeople, unaware of what churned below, continued to cling to their routines, yet every movement, every glance cast into the shadows, was filled with tension. Even the bravest among them could not shake the feeling that something watched them from within the fog, something that knew their names, their fears, their secrets. And as the night settled over Ashridge Hollow once more, they felt the weight of the darkness pressing in on all sides, a darkness that carried with it the promise of something far worse than shadows. Above the town, the moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a sickly, pale light over the hollow. It illuminated the iron gate of the cemetery, the twisted trees, and the ancient oak that now seemed to stand guard over the crack in the earth. And as that thin light touched the gaping wound in the soil, the shadows around it trembled, retreating slightly, as if they too feared what lay beneath. But the whispers never ceased, not even as the fog swallowed the moonlight, not even as the night deepened into a blackness that seemed to have no end. They continued to murmur, low and insistent, growing bolder with each passing hour, as if urging something to rise from the depths, as if calling to a hunger that had long been starved. And in the distance, beyond the iron gate, beyond the town's edge, the unseen gate creaked open just a little further, inviting whatever lingered in the dark to take another step closer, a step toward the town, toward the warmth and life that pulsed through its narrow streets, a step toward the feast that awaited beneath the pale glow of the moon. Chapter 4. Where the Trees Weep. Night had swallowed Ashridge Hollow whole. The fog, thicker than ever, moved through the town like a living thing, brushing against windows and curling around corners with a chilling intimacy. It filled the gaps between buildings, rising up to the eaves of old houses and muffling the world in a blanket of darkness. The town's narrow streets twisted into labyrinthine paths where shadows lurked, each corner hiding shapes that seemed to shift and sway when no eyes were upon them. In the heart of the hollow, The church bells tolled midnight. Their chimes rang out through the fog, but the sound seemed to dull before it reached the edge of town, swallowed by the oppressive air. The last bell lingered, echoing like a heartbeat in the night, and then faded into the silence that followed. The churchyard, once a place of solace, now seemed to lean away from the surrounding darkness, the stones of its walls growing cold and brittle. Beneath the hollow, the ground continued to move, a slow, undulating motion that pulsed through the cemetery like the breath of a sleeping beast. The crack beneath the old oak widened further, its sickly glow now more intense, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the headstones. The light from below flickered with a rhythmic beat, matching the pulse of something deep within the earth, as if the very soil was alive with a hidden heartbeat. In the homes nearest the cemetery, restless dreams plagued the town's residents. They saw visions of dark figures slipping through their homes, moving through walls and ceilings, creeping up from beneath their floors. Their bodies shivered with a cold that seeped into their bones, leaving their skin clammy with sweat, and many awoke with a start, staring into the darkness with a sense that something watched them from the shadows. On the edge of the woods, the black cat that had wandered through the iron gate now prowled restlessly, its fur bristling as it sensed the change in the air. It slunk low to the ground, eyes wide as they reflected the unnatural light from the crack in the earth. The cat paused beside a gravestone, its ears twitching as it listened to the whispers that spilled from the dark, a strange melody that seemed to twist through the trees, vibrating through the roots and reaching up into the branches above. The whispers, once faint, had grown bolder. They swirled around the old oak, rising like a chant that filled the air with a sense of ancient knowledge. They spoke in a language older than the hollow itself, a language that had no words but conveyed a hunger, a yearning that could not be sated. The fog responded to their call, thickening as if drawn to the source, gathering around the base of the oak in writhing tendrils that seemed to dig into the earth, eager to join whatever lay beneath. From the depths of the crack, the thin, clawed hand appeared again, emerging from the soil like a root seeking the surface. It grasped the edge of the fissure, pulling itself upward with a jerky, unnatural strength. This time, a second hand followed, its fingers trailing dark, oily residue that stained the earth and left the grass withered and black. The hands dug into the soil, pulling with a slow, steady force until a head appeared. Featureless and covered in the same dark substance, its surface smooth like obsidian but pulsing with veins of sickly green light. The figure that rose from the earth had no true form. It was a being made of shadow, its edges constantly shifting, blending with the fog as it pulled itself free of the ground. Where eyes should have been, there were only hollow pits that glowed faintly, casting a dim, greenish light over the surrounding graves. It stood hunched beneath the oak, limbs too long, too thin, bending at impossible angles as if struggling to adjust to the air above the earth. As it moved, the shadows around it seemed to ripple, drawn toward the creature like moths to a flame. From the town, the residents felt a shift in the air. A pressure settled over the hollow, pressing down on their chests, making it difficult to breathe. They felt it in the creak of the floorboards beneath their feet, in the way the shadows lengthened in their homes, bending toward some unseen center. In the attic of Crowther Manor, a dust-covered mirror cracked, its surface splitting into a spiderweb of fractures that reflected the darkness gathering in the room behind it. Outside, the fog began to twist, spiraling inward toward the cemetery like water swirling into a drain. It gathered around the figure beneath the oak, drawn to the crack in the earth that pulsed with that eerie, rhythmic light. And as the figure raised its head toward the distant town, the whispers reached a fevered pitch, their chant becoming a single, low hum that resonated through the fog, carrying with it a sense of inevitability, of a hunger that would not be denied. The ancient stones of the mausoleums shuddered, as if trying to resist the force that now pulsed through the earth. One of the stone doors, sealed shut for decades, finally gave way with a hollow crack, toppling forward into the grass. A wave of cold air spilled out from the crypt, and with it came a scent like rot and decay, a stench that filled the fog and swept through the trees, reaching all the way to the iron gate that had once kept the cemetery's secrets locked away. Inside the now open mausoleum, shadows coiled and writhed, moving with a life of their own. They seemed to converge into a singular point, a darkness so deep it devoured the light from the crack in the earth. The figure beneath the oak watched, its faceless head cocked as if listening to the sound of the shadows gathering, the hum rising to a pitch that threatened to shatter the air itself. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the hum fell silent. The shadows within the crypt stilled, becoming a solid mass that pooled across the ground like spilled ink. The figure beneath the oak, now fully free of the earth, turned its hollow gaze toward the town, its limbs straightening with a slow, creaking motion that sent a shiver through the surrounding trees. It raised one hand, thin fingers clawing at the air, and the fog around it seemed to bend inward, drawn into its grasp like smoke drawn into a fire. Ashridge Hollow held its breath, the town locked in a moment of frozen stillness. In that silence, the figure began to move, each step a jerky lurch that left behind footprints of darkness, imprints in the earth that seeped with the same black substance that coated its form. It crossed the cemetery in uneven strides, moving with a purpose that defied its grotesque, misshapen body, dragging the shadows in its wake as it approached the iron gate. The gate, which had swung shut after the last visitor had fled, now shuddered open again, the rusted hinges creaking in protest. Beyond the gate, the hollow stretched out before the figure like a canvas waiting to be painted in darkness. The streets that had been so full of fear and whispers now lay open, unguarded, vulnerable beneath the swirling fog. As the figure stepped through the gate, the fog shifted around it, reshaping itself into vague, twisted shapes that seemed to mimic its movements, mirroring its every step. And the town, wrapped in its blanket of shadows, could only watch as the figure began its slow approach, a harbinger of the darkness that had awoken beneath the soil, drawn by the opening of the unseen gate. Somewhere in the distance, a lantern flickered out, its flame consumed by the fog. The figure paused, its head turning toward the source of the darkness, toward the town that now trembled under the weight of its presence. It lifted its hands, spreading its long, bony fingers wide, and the fog surged forward like a wave, pouring into the streets, flooding the spaces between buildings, seeping into every crack and crevice. And as the fog enveloped Ashridge Hollow, the whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the air with a song of hunger and secrets, a song that promised that the shadows, once released, would not be contained again. Chapter 5. Blood Moon Rising. The fog thickened until it was nearly solid, a suffocating shroud that draped over Ashridge Hollow and turned the town into a maze of gray and shadows. It wrapped itself around the houses, winding through the alleyways and curling beneath the door frames like an unwelcome visitor. The moon above struggled to pierce through the dense clouds, casting only faint patches of sickly light onto the streets below. But in the deep pockets of darkness where the fog gathered most heavily, even that dim light seemed to fade, swallowed by a blackness that pulsed with a malevolent life. In the homes closest to Crowther Manor, a biting cold crept through the walls. Frost began to form on window panes, tracing intricate, spiraling patterns that seemed to spell out warnings in a language no one could read. Inside, candles flickered erratically, their flames bending as if pushed by a breath that came from nowhere. Shadows stretched and twisted in ways that defied the flickering light, bending into shapes that hinted at faces, hands, and long, sinuous bodies. The air was filled with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the occasional thud of a loose shutter or the creak of old wood settling beneath the pressure of the fog. Yet beneath this surface quiet, a current of dread surged, weaving its way through the heart of the hollow. It flowed like a hidden river beneath the cobblestones, finding its source in the crack beneath the old oak tree where the unnatural light continued to pulse, casting the surrounding headstones into a grotesque, wavering dance. The figure that had emerged from the crack now roamed the outskirts of town, moving with that same jerky, lurching gait. It lingered just beyond the reach of the lanterns, a silhouette more solid than the fog yet more fluid than flesh, slipping between trees and across empty fields. It moved without a sound, but its presence stirred the fog, sending ripples through the air that made the trees shudder and the grass lie flat against the earth. It wasn't alone. The shadows that had gathered within the cemetery now trailed behind it, moving like a swarm. They coiled and twisted, changing shape with every heartbeat, merging with the fog until they became indistinguishable from it. But as the figure approached the edge of town, the shadows seemed to draw back, lingering at the borders like wolves circling their prey, unwilling to cross the threshold just yet. As the fog crept deeper into Ashridge Hollow, the town itself began to change. The cobblestones beneath the figure's feet cracked, splitting open like dry skin, revealing gaps through which the same sickly, greenish light seeped upward from the earth. The light seemed to spread beneath the ground like roots, weaving through the foundations of the homes, curling around their wooden beams and seeping into the cracks in their stone walls. It was a light that carried with it a deep, thrumming rhythm, like the slow, deliberate beating of a monstrous heart buried somewhere beneath the soil. Crowther Manor, which loomed over the town like a sentinel, felt the pulse of that heartbeat the strongest. The once grand estate, with its crumbling facade and shattered windows, now seemed to come alive with the shadows that crawled through its halls. The ivy that covered its stone walls withered, turning black and brittle, and fell away in clumps that left the bricks bare and exposed to the night air. Inside, the air was thick with a stench of rot that grew stronger with each passing hour, and the floors buckled as if something moved beneath them, straining against the layers of dirt and time that had kept it buried for so long. In the manor's cellar, the crack that had opened in the floor had widened to reveal a set of ancient stone steps leading downward into a darkness that seemed to swallow all light. The shadows that roamed the manor congregated at the top of these steps, their forms flickering and undulating like black flames. They hovered there, as if awaiting some signal, some final word that would release them into the world above. Above ground, the townspeople could not escape the sense that the hollow itself was shifting, that the boundaries of their world were being drawn tighter with each breath they took. Some who had taken refuge in the church lit more candles, hoping that the fragile flames would stave off the encroaching darkness. Others locked their doors and pressed their ears to the wood, straining to hear the footsteps that whispered through the streets, growing closer with every beat of that hidden heart. But the figure in the fog paid no heed to their fear. It reached the town's edge and paused, lifting its head as if to taste the air. The green glow from its hollow eye sockets illuminated the nearest houses, casting their windows in a ghastly light that revealed faces peering out from behind drawn curtains, wide-eyed and pale with terror. The figure stretched out one long, clawed hand, and as its fingers unfurled, the shadows behind it surged forward, rolling into the town like a wave. The fog swirled faster now, spinning into vortexes that carved spirals into the ground, deepening the cracks in the earth and spreading the green light like veins through the town. Where the light touched, time seemed to warp. Flowers that had died months ago bloomed and withered within moments, their petals falling to the ground as brittle ash. Clocks inside homes spun wildly, hands clicking forward and backward with a life of their own, until their glass faces shattered, spilling the gears and springs onto the floor. Near the center of town, a maple tree that had stood for decades split down the middle, its trunk snapping with a sound like thunder. As it fell, the ground beneath it opened, revealing a deeper layer of earth that pulsed with the same eerie glow. The roots of the tree reached down into that strange light, twisting into grotesque shapes as they seemed to seek out the darkness below. From the open crack beneath the oak in the cemetery, the shadows spilled forth with greater speed, flowing over the ground like black water. They slipped between the gravestones, creeping through the wrought iron fence and into the town proper. The streets they crossed became darker, the stones beneath them growing slick with the oily residue that dripped from their forms, leaving behind a trail of rot and decay that spread like a stain. And through it all, the figure continued its slow march toward the heart of Ashridge Hollow, drawn by the pulse that thrummed beneath the town like a beacon. It moved toward the church, its long fingers trailing through the fog, leaving tendrils of darkness that twisted into shapes almost too horrific to behold. Faces caught in silent screams, hands reaching up from the shadows, mouths open wide as if gasping for air. In the town square, the lanterns that had once cast pools of light now flickered out, one by one, snuffed by the shadows that flowed through the streets like a tide. The darkness that replaced them was complete, a void that seemed to devour sound as well as light, leaving only the faint echo of the town's heartbeat to remind the residents that they were not alone. At the edge of the square, the figure paused again, tilting its head toward the sky as if sensing something in the distance. The fog around it swirled faster, rising up to obscure its form until it became nothing more than a dark silhouette against the swirling gray. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it extended its arms wide, embracing the town with its shadowed reach. The whispers that had plagued the town grew louder, rising to a fever pitch, their voices weaving together into a single, wordless cry that echoed through the fog. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself, a call that beckoned the darkness closer, that urged the shadows to consume everything they touched. And as the figure's arms stretched wider, the crack beneath the oak split open further, releasing a surge of cold air that swept through the town, chilling the blood of those who remained awake in their homes. The shadows responded to the call, flowing faster, surging toward the church and the manor and the homes that huddled together beneath the weight of the fog. They converged on the heart of the hollow, drawn by the figure's command, by the hunger that pulsed through the night like a drumbeat. In the final moments before the darkness swallowed the town square completely, the figure lowered its arms, and the fog around it grew still. For a heartbeat, everything fell silent, as if the entire hollow had been wrapped in a cocoon of waiting. Then the shadows surged forward, merging with the fog in a wave that washed over the town, filling every crevice, every breath, every thought with darkness. And in that darkness, the heartbeat of Ashridge Hollow echoed louder than ever, a sound that seemed to promise that the night was only just beginning. Chapter 6. Footsteps in the Fog. The fog settled over Ashridge Hollow like a suffocating blanket, heavy with a sense of dread that seeped into every corner of the town. The air was thick and damp, clinging to skin and clothing, carrying a chill that felt deeper than mere cold. It penetrated through the wooden walls of homes, curling around sleeping bodies and slipping beneath blankets like an uninvited guest. As the fog swallowed the town whole, the world beyond its borders seemed to vanish, leaving only a void that stretched on forever. In this endless night, time itself seemed to distort. The clocks that had spun wildly earlier now sat broken and silent, their hands frozen at impossible angles. Candles, which had been lit in desperate attempts to keep the shadows at bay, had long since burned out, their wicks reduced to blackened stubs. darkness ruled over Ashridge Hollow with an iron grip, a darkness so complete that even the memory of daylight felt like a distant dream, something that belonged to another world. The figure that had emerged from the crack beneath the oak prowled through the town like a predator, slipping through the streets with an unnatural fluidity. Its movements were jerky and uneven, each step creating ripples through the fog that spread out in all directions, touching every hidden corner of the town. Its head turned slowly as it walked, the hollow pits where eyes should have been glowing with a dull, greenish light that cast sickly shadows over the cobblestones. In its wake, the shadows followed, growing bolder and more defined. They slipped through the spaces between houses, pooling beneath trees and creeping along the walls, their edges blurring as they merged with the fog. They moved like a living thing, twisting and shifting into shapes that seemed to mimic the memories of the town's past. Twisted silhouettes that bore the outlines of the hollow's long-dead residents, their faces warped into expressions of fear and longing. As the figure wandered deeper into the heart of Ashridge Hollow, the pulse beneath the town grew louder, a steady, rhythmic beat that reverberated through the ground, shaking loose the foundations of old buildings and sending shivers through the earth. The streets, once orderly and familiar, began to twist and shift beneath the fog's influence, warping into strange, winding paths that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. It was as if the town itself was being reshaped, molded by the darkness that had awoken beneath its soil. The iron gate at the edge of the cemetery groaned on its hinges, swinging open and shut with a slow, creaking rhythm that matched the pulse. The headstones in the graveyard trembled as the cracks beneath them spread wider, revealing glimpses of the unnatural light below. Some of the older stones toppled, shattering into pieces as the ground beneath them gave way, revealing roots that twisted and curled, pulsing with the same sickly glow that now spread through the town. In the woods beyond the cemetery, the trees seemed to lean inward, their branches bending toward the center of town as if drawn by some invisible force. The leaves, which had once been vibrant with the colors of autumn, now hung limp and withered, coated with a thin layer of frost that crackled underfoot. The air beneath the canopy was colder still, thick with a silence that pressed down on the forest like a weight, muffling even the sound of the wind. Animals that had once roamed the woods now hid in their burrows, their eyes wide with a terror they could not understand. The black cat that had prowled along the cemetery's edge watched from the shadows, its fur bristling as the figure passed by, its eyes reflecting the sickly green glow that spilled from the cracks. It crouched low to the ground, muscles tensed, as if it too sensed that something terrible was on the verge of breaking free. Near the town square, Crowther Manor loomed like a shadow over the surrounding houses. The once grand structure now seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the earth beneath it, the cracks in its walls glowing faintly as the light seeped through, spilling into the night like blood from an open wound. Inside, the corridors were filled with shadows that writhed and coiled against the stone, creating shapes that whispered of forgotten secrets and ancient rites. The cellar door, which had been sealed for decades, now stood wide open, revealing the ancient stone steps that descended into the earth. A gust of cold air spilled up from the darkness below, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay, mingled with something older and more bitter. A scent that spoke of roots buried deep in the soil and the memories of things that had once lived but now lay forgotten. The shadows that gathered around the door seemed to pulse in time with the heartbeat of the earth, slipping down the stairs as if beckoned by whatever lay below. And in the church, the air grew colder still. The few remaining candles sputtered and died, plunging the nave into darkness. The ancient wood of the pews creaked under the weight of the silence, as if the building itself could feel the tension that filled the air. The stained glass windows, once a riot of colors, now appeared as dark as the night outside, their images twisted and warped by the shadows that crept across their surfaces. Beneath the altar, the stone floor had begun to crack, splitting open to reveal a glimpse of the same greenish light that pulsed from the cemetery and beneath Crowther Manor. The light seeped upward, casting strange shadows across the church's stone walls, twisting the familiar symbols into shapes that seemed to mock the faith they once represented. And as the light spread, the air filled with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the stone, matching the rhythm of the pulse that now controlled the town. The townspeople, those few who had not yet succumbed to sleep or madness, huddled in their homes, feeling the pressure of the darkness weighing down upon them. Some clutched old charms and heirlooms, hoping that the relics of their past would ward off whatever approached, while others simply stared into the darkness, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. The fog seemed to press against their windows like a living thing, the shadows within it shifting and stretching, forming shapes that hinted at faces just beyond the glass. In one of the oldest homes, a cracked mirror reflected a room that no longer existed. Its surface showed a vision of a place where shadows moved like water, flowing through rooms that had never been built, whispering of things that should not be remembered. The glass fractured further, splintering into 1,000 pieces, each one reflecting a different fragment of the darkness that had taken hold of the town. Beyond the iron gate of the cemetery, the figure paused once more, lifting its head as if listening to the whispers that filled the air. The shadows around it rippled, bending toward the figure like iron filings drawn to a magnet, merging into its form until it seemed to swell with the darkness that surrounded it. It lifted its clawed hands, and the fog gathered around them, twisting into shapes that resembled wings, black and ragged, like the wings of a moth drawn to the flame. As the figure spread its shadowed wings, the pulse beneath the earth quickened, becoming a frantic, almost desperate beat that sent tremors through the ground. The cracks in the cobblestones widened, and the green light spilled upward, pooling around the figure's feet and casting its shadow across the town. The light, once confined to the earth below, now reached up into the fog, turning the swirling mist into a sickly, glowing cloud that hovered over the town like a storm ready to break. For a moment, everything hung in a terrible balance. The town, the fog, the figure, and the pulse. Each seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for a signal that would tip the scales. And then, with a sudden, violent shudder, the earth beneath Ashridge Hollow split wide open, releasing a wave of darkness that surged through the town like a flood. The shadows poured from the cracks, flowing through the streets in a tidal wave that swallowed everything in its path. They swept through homes, through the church, through Crowther Manor, leaving behind only darkness and silence. The town that had once been so full of whispers now held only the sound of the pulse, a sound that had become deafening, echoing through every corner, filling the air with the promise that nothing would ever be the same. And as the figure moved through the darkness, the shadows clinging to its form, Ashridge Hollow surrendered to the abyss that had opened beneath its feet, becoming a place where light and memory were things of the past. Chapter 7. The Hollow's Curse. The darkness that enveloped Ashridge Hollow became an ocean, deep and endless, swallowing every glimmer of light and every familiar sound. The fog thickened until it seemed more solid than air, a viscous substance that wrapped itself around buildings, trees, and the few remaining souls who clung to the fading hope of dawn. Yet dawn felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to a time before the shadows had emerged, before the figure's arrival had rewritten the town's fate. The once familiar streets of Ashridge Hollow had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and fog. Buildings loomed in the darkness, their outlines warped and distorted, leaning at impossible angles. The houses that had been home to generations of families now seemed like hollow shells, their windows empty eyes staring out into the void. As the fog moved through the town, it left a trail of frost on every surface, a thin, glittering layer that glowed faintly in the light that seeped from the cracks in the earth. The pulse beneath the town had grown into a constant throb, shaking the ground with each rhythmic beat. It felt like the heartbeat of something massive, a presence buried deep beneath the soil, stirring from a long slumber. The cracks that had spread through the cemetery, through Crowther Manor, and into the church had grown wider, splitting open the earth like jagged wounds. From these fissures, the greenish light poured upward, twisting into the air like smoke, casting long shadows that stretched toward the heart of town. In the town square, the great oak that had stood for centuries now leaned precariously over the shattered cobblestones, its roots exposed to the open air. The ancient wood creaked under the strain, groaning as the cracks beneath it deepened further, spreading through the soil in a web-like pattern. The roots, which had once anchored the tree firmly in place, now hung limp, twitching as if trying to burrow back into the earth that had rejected them. From the depths of those cracks came a sound, a low, rumbling murmur that seemed to carry the weight of the centuries. It was a sound that spoke of forgotten things, of old secrets buried beneath layers of time and dirt, of a hunger that had been waiting in the dark for longer than anyone could remember. It rippled through the fog, setting the air to quivering, and with each wave, the shadows that covered the town seemed to grow darker, more substantial, as if they were feeding on the very essence of the hollow. The figure that had emerged from beneath the oak tree stood at the center of this storm of darkness, its shadowed wings spread wide, embracing the void that had swallowed Ashridge Hollow. It moved through the town square with a slow, deliberate grace, trailing tendrils of darkness that coiled and writhed like living things. The ground beneath it seemed to bend and twist in response to its presence, warping into shapes that defied logic, as if the fabric of reality itself was unraveling in its wake. It reached the base of the ancient oak and paused, placing one clawed hand against the trunk. The wood split beneath its touch, the bark crumbling away to reveal a hollow core that pulsed with the same greenish glow that lit the cracks below. Inside the hollow, something moved, shifting in the darkness. An indistinct mass that seemed to stretch and coil, pressing against the confines of the tree like a creature trying to break free from its prison. As the figure stood there, its head tilted upward toward the branches that clawed at the sky, the shadows around it began to take on new forms. They stretched and shifted, growing more defined, taking on the outlines of figures from the town's past. Old faces appeared in the darkness, their expressions frozen in masks of horror and sorrow, their mouths open in silent screams that echoed the unspoken terror of those who had been lost to the hollow's secrets. The shadows of former residents, those who had walked the town streets long before the current generation, moved through the fog like specters caught between worlds. They slipped through the doors of their old homes, trailing memories of lives they had once lived. Memories of children playing in the fields, of lovers meeting under the oak, of festivals and winter fires. But now their forms were twisted and distorted, their movements jerky and stilted, as if they were being controlled by the unseen force that pulsed beneath the ground. Crowther Manor stood at the edge of the square, its broken windows staring out into the swirling fog. Inside, the shadows moved like water through the halls, flowing over the ancient tapestries and cracked portraits. The manor had become a vessel for the darkness that had spilled from the earth, a conduit through which the town's past seeped into the present. Rooms that had been empty for decades now echoed with the faint sound of footsteps, of doors creaking open and slamming shut, of whispers that spoke of things best left buried. In the cellar, the ancient stone steps led down into a darkness that felt deeper than night, a darkness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The walls of the cellar were lined with shelves covered in dust, filled with artifacts from a time long before the town had been built. Old tools, faded journals, and rusted locks sat untouched. relics of a forgotten age that had been swallowed by the passage of time. But now, the greenish light that seeped from below cast strange shadows over these objects, twisting them into shapes that bore little resemblance to their original forms. Beneath the cellar, the stone steps descended further than anyone in the town had ever known, spiraling down into the depths of the earth. At the bottom of the steps, a vast cavern opened, its walls lined with ancient roots that pulsed with the same green light. The floor was a sea of shadows, shifting and swirling as if alive, and at the center of the cavern, a great stone altar loomed, covered in carvings that spoke of rituals lost to history. The figure descended the steps slowly, its wings folding in close as it entered the cavern. The shadows that had gathered around it seemed to recoil from the altar, as if wary of what lay within the stone's carvings. The figure placed its hands on the altar's surface, and the carvings flared to life, glowing with a light that was colder and sharper than the glow that seeped from the cracks above. Symbols that had been hidden in the darkness for centuries now burned with an unnatural brilliance, revealing scenes of rituals performed by hands long since turned to dust. Rituals that spoke of binding, of sealing, of keeping something trapped beneath the earth. The air in the cavern grew colder, so cold that frost began to form on the stone, creeping up the walls like icy fingers reaching for the surface. The heartbeat of the town grew louder, more frantic, echoing through the cavern like the drums of a funeral procession. The shadows on the cavern floor writhed in response, surging upward to wrap around the figure's legs, pulling it closer to the altar, as if trying to reclaim it for the darkness. The figure resisted, its wings flaring wide, casting shadows across the walls that twisted into monstrous shapes that seemed to devour the ancient symbols that glowed beneath its hands. Above ground, the town shuddered as the earth beneath it shifted once more, the cracks spreading wider, releasing geysers of green light that shot up into the fog-choked sky. The houses groaned under the pressure, their wooden frames bending and warping as the roots beneath them twisted and turned, spreading further into the darkness. In the church, the stained glass windows cracked and shattered, raining colored shards down onto the pews below, each fragment catching the green light and refracting it into 1,000 points that danced across the stone floor. As the light spread, the whispers that filled the air grew more distinct, becoming a low chant that rose and fell with the rhythm of the town's pulse. It was a language that no living soul could understand, a language of roots and shadows, of ancient things that had slumbered beneath the earth for millennia. The chant wrapped itself around the town, filling the ears of those who remained, seeping into their minds like a poison that twisted their thoughts into nightmares. At the center of it all, the figure knelt before the altar, its head bowed as if in reverence to the darkness that had given it form. The shadows that had once followed it now swirled around the altar, forming a vortex that reached up into the cavern's ceiling, drawing the fog down from the world above. The figure lifted its head, and for the first time, its hollow eyes burned with a light that matched the glow of the ancient symbols, a light that seemed to promise that the old seals were breaking, that the darkness beneath Ashridge Hollow was finally, irrevocably free. Above, the town trembled on the edge of collapse, its streets and homes caught between worlds, suspended in a moment that stretched out like the shadow of a setting sun. And in that moment, as the darkness reached up to claim the town, the air filled with a sound that was almost like a breath, a sigh that whispered through the fog, carrying with it the promise that the Hollow's true night had only just begun. Chapter 8. Hands in the Dark. The darkness that had swallowed Ashridge Hollow grew deeper, settling into every crevice and corner like a living shadow. It was as if the town itself had become part of the void, its streets, buildings, and trees woven into the fabric of night. The fog that had once blanketed the town had thinned, but what remained carried a strange, metallic scent, like the air before a thunderstorm. It hovered low to the ground, swirling in slow circles, revealing glimpses of a landscape that was both familiar and alien. The town square, where the ancient oak tree stood on its fractured roots, had become a place of surreal horror. The cobblestones that had once been smooth were now splintered and uneven, heaving upward as if the earth itself had been turned inside out. The greenish light that seeped from the cracks painted everything in an otherworldly glow, turning shadows into solid forms that crept along the ground, mimicking the shapes of long-lost souls. Around the oak, the earth continued to shift and buckle, forcing the roots to writhe and twist like serpents. The hollow core of the tree had widened, the wood splintering outward as something within it strained to emerge. The ancient bark crumbled away, revealing layers of twisted roots that pulsed with the same light that bled from the ground. In the spaces between those roots, something dark and amorphous writhed, pressing against its wooden prison with a relentless, hungry force. Above, the sky was hidden behind a roiling mass of dark clouds, their edges tinged with the sickly green glow that rose from below. The clouds churned and twisted, as if stirred by an unseen hand, crackling with brief flashes of pale lightning that illuminated the town in stuttering bursts. With each flash, the twisted outlines of buildings and trees were briefly revealed, their shadows stretching long and thin across the broken streets before sinking back into the dark. The figure that had emerged from beneath the oak moved through this transformed landscape with an unhurried grace, its shadowed wings trailing behind like the tattered remnants of a cloak. The tendrils of darkness that coiled around its form reached out to touch the ground, brushing against the stones and roots, leaving trails of blackness that seemed to eat away at the light. It moved with a sense of purpose, as though each step it took was part of a ritual, a pattern that had been etched into the fabric of the Hollow's history. As it wandered, the figure's hollow gaze swept over the ruined town, taking in the shifting shadows that played out scenes from the past. In the window of an old bakery, a shadow flickered. A woman in a tattered apron, her face pale and drawn, holding the shape of a child who faded into mist. Across the square, near the remains of a tavern, another shadow stumbled and fell, its form dissolving into the fog as it sank into the cracks in the earth. The past and present overlapped here, folding into each other like the pages of a book turned too quickly, each scene leaving behind only echoes and empty spaces. The cavern below the town had become a crucible of darkness, the ancient altar at its heart glowing with an unnatural brilliance. The shadows that surrounded the altar writhed and seethed, twisting into shapes that resembled broken figures, their limbs stretching and contorting in ways that defied human anatomy. The green light pulsed in time with the heartbeat that reverberated through the ground, creating a rhythm that seemed to draw the shadows into a slow, hypnotic dance around the altar. At the center of this darkness, the figure knelt once more, its hands pressed to the stone altar, tracing the ancient carvings that glowed beneath its touch. The symbols that had once held meaning were now twisted and fractured, their original shapes lost to time, but they still carried a power that vibrated through the air like a deep, resonant hum. The figure's hollow eyes burned brighter as it traced each line, each curve, as if it were reading a story that had been buried for centuries. A story of binding, of sacrifice, of secrets that had been whispered to the roots of the oak tree long before the town had been built. The shadows that writhed around the figure seemed to listen to this story, twisting closer as the symbols flared with a brighter light. They stretched out their limbs toward the altar, reaching with skeletal hands that dissolved into mist before they could touch the stone. The shadows seemed to hunger for the light that pulsed from the carvings, drawn to it like moths to a flame. Even as the light seared their insubstantial forms, reducing them to tattered remnants that drifted away into the dark. Above the cavern, the town trembled under the weight of the darkness that pressed down from the sky and up from the earth. The cracks in the ground continued to widen, revealing deeper layers of green light that flowed like molten metal, spilling into the streets and pooling around the ancient oak. The roots of the tree reached downward, sinking into the glowing fissures, drinking in the light as if it were water. The tree shuddered with the effort, its branches creaking as they twisted toward the roiling sky, straining to reach something just beyond their grasp. In the depths of the old church, the shattered stained glass now lay scattered across the floor, each shard reflecting a distorted image of the shadows that moved through the nave. The altar, once a place of refuge, now stood surrounded by creeping tendrils of darkness that seeped up from the floor, winding around the broken pews. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, mingled with a metallic tang that stung the throat and lungs, leaving a bitter taste on the tongue. From beneath the altar, where the stone floor had cracked open, the green light spilled upward, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The wooden beams groaned under the weight of the darkness that filled the space, bending inward as if the church itself was being pulled toward the void. The hymnals that had once been stacked neatly in the pews were scattered across the floor, their pages torn and yellowed, fluttering in a wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the heart of Crowther Manor, the shadows that had gathered in the grand hall now flowed through the corridors like a river of darkness, slipping through doorways and up the stairs, winding through rooms that had been abandoned for decades. They whispered as they moved, their voices like the rustling of dry leaves, carrying with them the remnants of secrets that had been buried along with the manor's old inhabitants. The green light that seeped through the cracks in the manor's walls illuminated the faces of the portraits that lined the halls, twisting their painted expressions into grotesque parodies of joy and sorrow. The attic, where old trunks and forgotten relics lay covered in dust, had become a gathering place for the shadows. They clustered around the boarded-up windows, pressing against the wooden planks as if trying to glimpse the world outside. The floorboards creaked under their weight, bending as the shadows seeped through the cracks, slipping down into the rooms below. The attic door, which had once been locked tight, now hung open, swinging slowly back and forth in the darkness. At the edge of town, where the fog thickened into a wall that seemed to close off the rest of the world, the old graveyard lay in disarray. The headstones that had stood for centuries now lay scattered like bones, their inscriptions worn smooth by the passage of time. The earth had split open beneath them, revealing deep pits lined with the gnarled roots of the oak tree, roots that pulsed with the same light that seeped from the cracks. In those pits, shapes moved, shapes that had once been human but were now twisted into forms that bore little resemblance to the living. As the darkness deepened, the heartbeat beneath the town quickened, each throb sending ripples through the fog that spread out in concentric circles, like the surface of a disturbed pond. The figure in the cavern lifted its head, and for a moment, the shadows paused in their dance, as if listening to the silence that followed each beat. The air grew thick with anticipation, a tension that pressed down on the town like a held breath, stretching the moment into eternity. And then, with a shudder that seemed to reverberate through the bones of the earth itself, the cavern walls cracked open wider, releasing a surge of green light that spilled upward into the night. It shot through the fissures in the town square, through the gaps beneath Crowther Manor, through the shattered floor of the church, illuminating the town in a blinding flash that turned every shadow into a sharp-edged silhouette. The shadows recoiled from the light, twisting and writhing as they were forced back into the cracks from which they had emerged. But even as they fled, they seemed to laugh, a sound that filled the air with a sense of bitter triumph, a reminder that the darkness that had been unleashed upon Ashridge Hollow could not be so easily banished. In the silence that followed, the town settled once more into the darkness that had claimed it, the green light fading into the cracks until only a faint glow remained. But the shadows lingered at the edges of sight, slipping through the fog, whispering of a hunger that would not be sated. And in the heart of the cavern, the figure knelt before the ancient altar, its wings folding in close, as if preparing for the final act of a ritual that had begun long before the first stone of Ashridge Hollow had been laid. Chapter 9. Eyes of the Lost. As the pulse of Ashridge Hollow beat through the very earth, the remnants of the town held their collective breath, caught in a suspended moment between past and present. The greenish glow that had once surged upward from the cracks in the ground was now a ghost of its former self, leaving behind faint traces of light that flickered like dying embers. The fog, thick and heavy, draped over the streets like a funeral shroud, obscuring the horrors that lurked within. The figure at the heart of the cavern remained motionless, its hollow eyes fixed on the altar, where the ancient carvings pulsed gently in the dim light. Each symbol glimmered like a distant star, hinting at a cosmic connection that transcended the mortal realm. The atmosphere within the cavern was electric, charged with a sense of purpose that thrummed in time with the heartbeat of the earth, weaving an intricate tapestry of life and death. Outside, the landscape of Ashridge Hollow had shifted again, warping under the weight of the darkness that pressed in from all sides. The buildings appeared to lean closer together, their walls closing in as if drawn toward an unseen center. Shadows danced along the surfaces, flickering in and out of existence, morphing into shapes that suggested movement. A child's laughter, a lover's embrace, a scream lost to the night. The great oak tree stood as a sentinel in the town square, its branches twisted and gnarled, silhouetted against the flickering light that seeped through the cracks in the earth. The roots writhed like serpents, burrowing deeper into the ground, searching for something just beyond their reach. They pulsed with life, drawing energy from the depths of the hollow, and as they did, the shadows around the tree thickened, merging into one amorphous mass that obscured the ground beneath. From the shadows emerged forms, ghostly silhouettes that glided silently toward the oak. They were the remnants of those who had lived and died in Ashridge Hollow, their faces twisted with longing and despair. Each specter was an echo of a life once lived, a memory of laughter and love now tainted by the darkness that had seeped into their very essence. They reached out with trembling hands, fingers brushing against the bark of the ancient tree, seeking solace or perhaps vengeance for the wrongs they had suffered. The air in the town was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, an aroma that clung to the back of the throat and sent chills skittering down the spine. The fog curled around the streets, wrapping around lampposts and clinging to the walls of buildings like a lover's embrace turned suffocating. Each breath felt like a battle against the oppressive weight of the atmosphere, an invitation to succumb to the darkness that whispered promises of power and revenge. Within the church, where the altar had once been a place of refuge, shadows now loomed like dark sentinels. The remnants of old hymns echoed through the air, twisted into a dissonant melody that reverberated off the cracked walls. The flickering remnants of light that had once illuminated the stained glass windows now struggled against the encroaching darkness, creating patterns that danced across the floor, glimpses of the sacred intertwined with the profane. In the silence, the shadows began to converge around the altar, swirling and writhing as if participating in an ancient ritual. They coalesced into shapes that echoed the lives of those who had once worshipped there. Figures in prayer, hands clasped, eyes closed in devotion. Yet their faces were now gaunt, eyes hollow, reflecting the loss of faith that had seeped into the very stones of the church. Beneath the altar, the fissures in the earth had widened, revealing a chasm that pulsed with a sickly green light. The air grew colder, the darkness more palpable, as if something ancient and malevolent awaited just beyond the threshold. The whispers of the shadows filled the space, a cacophony of voices that wove through the air like smoke, carrying secrets from the past that echoed with sorrow. The figure in the cavern knelt before the altar, its wings folded tightly against its back. The tendrils of darkness that surrounded it coiled and flickered like living flames, their whispers merging with the chorus of voices that filled the air. The figure's hollow eyes glowed with a bright intensity, reflecting the pulsing symbols on the altar as it reached out to touch the stone. As its fingers made contact, the symbols flared to life, illuminating the cavern with a brilliance that pushed back the shadows. The air shimmered with energy, vibrating with the weight of forgotten promises and shattered dreams. The figure pressed its palms against the altar, and the light intensified, sending waves of energy rippling through the ground, reaching up toward the town above. In the town square, the oak tree shuddered, its roots trembling as if struck by a sudden jolt of electricity. The ground beneath it cracked open wider, revealing a deeper layer of green light that spilled forth like a fountain. The darkness that had crept into every corner began to retreat, drawn back toward the earth as if repelled by the brilliance of the symbols that glowed beneath the tree. The shadows gathered in the square retreated reluctantly, swirling around the edges as the light expanded outward. The forms of the lost souls flickered in and out, caught between the urge to flee and the desire to remain tethered to the place that had been their home. They clung to the darkness, even as it dissipated, their voices rising in a haunting melody that echoed through the night. The pulse of the town quickened, matching the rhythm of the heartbeat that resonated deep beneath the surface. As the light surged upward, the figures in the shadows began to shift, their forms becoming more defined. Faces appeared, twisted with anguish, their expressions reflecting the pain of abandonment and loss that had defined their existence in the hollow. Each face carried its own story, a mother searching for her child, a lover longing for a return, a friend seeking vengeance for a betrayal. They reached out, fingers stretching toward the light that beckoned them. Yet they remained trapped within the veil of shadows, caught between worlds as they hovered on the brink of release. The figure at the altar pressed harder, its wings extending outward, catching the brilliance of the light and reflecting it like a beacon into the night. The shadows recoiled, twisting and writhing as they tried to escape the expanding glow. It was a moment of reckoning, a collision of light and darkness, of life and death, of past and future. As the green light surged through the town, the trees shuddered, their leaves rustling as if whispering forgotten secrets. The buildings leaned closer together, their walls trembling under the weight of the memories that flooded back. The echoes of laughter, the sounds of footsteps, and the faint music of life began to resurface, intertwining with the sorrowful cries of the lost souls. But the light was not without its price. As it surged upward, it revealed the grotesque remnants of those who had been lost to the darkness, the faces of the forgotten twisted in eternal pain, caught in the throes of a memory that would never let them go. The air thickened with the weight of their sorrow, the cries of anguish filling the space between the heartbeat of the town and the pulse of the earth. The figure knelt before the altar, eyes burning with determination. With each heartbeat, it drew upon the energy that surged through the symbols carved into the stone, pouring its will into the light that threatened to break free. It was a desperate gamble, a final effort to reclaim what had been lost and sever the ties that bound the souls to the darkness. Above ground, the town quaked as the shadows writhed in an anguished dance, pulled taut between the suffocating grip of the void and the promising light that fought to reclaim them. The fog swirled and thickened, transforming the air into a living entity, pressing against the lungs of those who remained, challenging them to face the darkness that had been unleashed. The echoes of forgotten voices filled the air, rising in a crescendo that swept through the town, intertwining with the pulse of the earth. The figures of the lost souls flickered between the light and shadow, caught in a conflict that transcended their mortal existence. In that moment, they were both free and captive, their fates intertwined with the darkness that had claimed Ashridge Hollow. As the light began to break through the shadows, The townsfolk who remained felt a shiver pass through their bones, a sense of awareness washing over them like a tide. They emerged from their homes, drawn by the ethereal glow that illuminated the town square, gathering like moths to a flame. Their faces reflected a mix of fear and hope, uncertainty mingling with the flickering light that beckoned them forward. But the figure at the altar remained focused, its wings expanding to embrace the radiant glow. The shadows twisted violently, struggling against the pull of the light, but the figure held firm, a solitary beacon amidst the chaos. It understood the cost of what was to come, a price paid in echoes and memories, in a battle that would determine the fate of the Hollow. And as the town of Ashridge Hollow stood on the precipice of change, a single thought lingered in the air, a whisper carried on the winds of fate. The darkness that had claimed the town was not merely a force to be feared. It was a part of the very fabric of their existence, woven into their stories, their memories, their souls. In that moment, as the light surged and shadows writhed, the figure at the altar prepared for the final act of the ancient ritual, a culmination of all that had come before, a convergence of the lost and the forgotten, as Ashridge Hollow teetered on the edge of salvation and destruction. Chapter 10. The Creaking Door. The atmosphere in Ashridge Hollow thickened, suffused with a palpable tension that hung in the air like a heavy mist. The glow that had erupted from the cracks in the ground pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the earth, a frantic call echoing through the town, summoning those who remained tethered to its haunted legacy. Shadows continued to writhe at the edges of the cobblestone streets, their movements a chaotic dance, caught between the encroaching light and the depths of darkness. In the town square, the ancient oak tree stood resolute, its gnarled branches reaching skyward, struggling against the weight of the fog that clung to the earth. Its roots twisted deeper into the ground, seeking the source of the pulsing green light, yearning to break free from the binds of the past. As the energy surged, the bark of the tree split open in places, revealing the vibrant, glowing tendrils that pulsated with the same rhythmic heartbeat, linking it to the ancient altar below. The shadows surrounding the oak began to coalesce, forming shapes that were half-formed echoes of the past, figures of those who had once walked the cobbled streets, their faces now obscured by the veil of darkness. They flickered in and out of existence, drawn to the light yet held back by the remnants of their own despair. Each figure bore the weight of memories lost, of lives interrupted by the encroaching darkness that had seeped into the very fabric of Ashridge Hollow. As the glow intensified, the figure in the cavern pressed its palms harder against the altar, feeling the ancient carving's pulse beneath its touch. The energy surged through it, igniting its hollow eyes with a brilliant light that reflected the history of the town. The symbols carved into the stone began to rearrange themselves, shifting in response to the figure's will, creating new patterns that pulsed with a force that resonated deep within the heart of the hollow. In the depths of the cavern, the shadows writhed violently, struggling against the light that threatened to unravel them. The tendrils of darkness slithered across the stone floor, seeking refuge from the brilliance that pierced the air. They coiled and twisted, morphing into grotesque shapes that echoed the pain and suffering of those who had been trapped within the town's cursed history. In the church, the shadows had gathered, converging around the altar where the remnants of faith had once thrived. The stained glass windows trembled as the figures within began to emerge, their ethereal forms caught in the chaotic interplay of light and shadow. Faces of the past flickered across the glass, expressions frozen in moments of joy and despair, as the air thickened with the essence of those long gone. Outside, the townsfolk had gathered in the square, drawn by the glowing light that illuminated the night. They stood together in a solemn silence, eyes wide with wonder and fear, as the shadows swirled around them. Their breath hung in the air, mingling with the fog that coiled around their ankles, creating a surreal tableau that blurred the lines between reality and the supernatural. As the light continued to pulse, it illuminated the remnants of the past. A crumbling home where laughter once echoed, a marketplace filled with the sounds of life, and a school where children played and learned. Each flicker of light revealed glimpses of these memories, weaving them into a tapestry of existence that transcended time. In the depths of the cavern, the figure's wings unfurled, catching the light and casting long shadows against the walls. The tendrils of darkness writhed in response, seeking to escape the brilliance that threatened to expose their hidden secrets. The echoes of the past surged forward, memories spilling out in a torrent that collided with the present, weaving an intricate web of fate that bound the town together. In that moment of convergence, the memories of Ashridge Hollow awakened, rising up to reclaim their place in the tapestry of life. The air grew thick with energy as the light expanded outward, brushing against the figures that had emerged from the shadows, breathing life back into their forms. The lost souls began to coalesce, their features becoming clearer, as the essence of their existence was pulled back into the world of the living. With each heartbeat, the connection deepened. The figures of the lost souls swirled around the oak tree, merging with the shadows that had haunted the town for so long. Their collective energy surged, creating a vortex of light and darkness, a spiral that danced in time with the pulse of the earth. The echoes of their laughter and cries filled the air, a haunting symphony of lives entwined in a struggle against the void. As the townsfolk watched, transfixed by the unfolding spectacle, they felt the weight of the past pressing against their souls. The realization washed over them. The darkness that had claimed Ashridge Hollow was not merely an external force. It was a part of them, woven into their identities, their memories, their histories. They had been shaped by the shadows that lingered, marked by the pain of those who had come before. The figure at the altar pressed on, pouring its will into the symbols, urging them to awaken the past and reclaim what had been lost. The energy flowed through it, merging with the light that radiated from the altar, igniting a spark that surged through the cavern, breaking through the barriers that separated the living from the dead. In the town square, the glow intensified, bathing the streets in a brilliant light that pushed back the shadows. The oak tree shivered, its branches quaking under the weight of history as the roots burrowed deeper, reaching for the source of the pulsing energy. The townsfolk felt the ground tremble beneath their feet, a reminder that they were standing on the bones of their ancestors, their fates intertwined with those who had walked these streets long before them. And then, with a final surge of power, the shadows burst forth from their confines, rushing toward the light like moths drawn to a flame. The air crackled with energy as the figures of the lost souls poured into the square, their forms coalescing into a swirling mass of light and darkness. The ground shook, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble as the two forces clashed in a dazzling display of color and sound. The townsfolk stood frozen in awe, witnessing the culmination of centuries of sorrow and longing, a moment of reckoning that would determine the fate of Ashridge Hollow. In that instant, the boundaries between the past and present dissolved, leaving only the essence of what had been and what could be. As the light surged through the square, the figures of the lost souls began to take shape, their faces illuminated by the glow. Each expression reflected a life once lived, a story waiting to be told. They reached out toward the townsfolk, their hands stretching into the light as they called forth the memories of love, laughter, and loss. And as the darkness writhed in agony, the townsfolk felt the pull of their own histories. Moments of joy intertwined with sorrow, the echoes of laughter mingled with tears. The shadows that had haunted them for so long began to lift, giving way to a new understanding of their past. They were not merely victims of fate. They were the custodians of their own stories, bound together by the threads of life that stretched beyond the grave. With a final, blinding flash, the light enveloped the square, washing over everything in its path. The darkness screamed in protest, but it was no match for the brilliance that surged forth, illuminating the town of Ashridge Hollow in a way it had not been seen in generations. And as the echoes of the past faded into the night, a new dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a warm glow upon the town. The shadows that had once loomed large were diminished, their hold weakened by the reclamation of memories and the acceptance of what had been lost. In the heart of the cavern, the figure at the altar stood tall, wings unfurled, as it released the energy it had harnessed. The pulsing glow began to fade, the symbols on the altar settling into stillness as the shadows that had gathered around it receded into the earth. The figure remained, a silent guardian, watching over the town as it began to awaken to a new reality. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the townsfolk felt a shift within themselves. The weight of their past had been lifted, and in its place, there was a glimmer of hope, a promise of renewal, of understanding, and of a future free from the shadows of despair. And so, in the quiet of the early morning, as the light broke over Ashridge Hollow, a new chapter began to unfold, one that would weave together the threads of the past with the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 11. Voices Beneath the Earth. As dawn broke over Ashridge Hollow, the town slowly emerged from the clutches of night, shaking off the remnants of shadow and despair. The once familiar streets, now bathed in warm sunlight, bore witness to the transformation that had begun. The air, filled with the scent of damp earth and fresh beginnings, carried with it a subtle magic, the promise of rebirth lingering just beyond the horizon. The townsfolk wandered cautiously, their eyes wide with wonder as they explored the changes that had taken place overnight. The fog that had shrouded their lives in uncertainty was dissipating, retreating to the corners of their memories, leaving behind a clarity they had not felt in years. Each step they took seemed to resonate with the heartbeat of the earth beneath them, a rhythm that reminded them of the connections that bound them to one another. In the town square, the ancient oak tree stood proud and resolute, its bark now shimmering in the early light, as if it too had awakened from a long slumber. The cracks in the ground that had once emitted a sickly glow were now mere fissures, their energy transformed into gentle streams of warmth that seemed to pulse in time with the pulse of the earth. The townsfolk gathered around the tree, drawn by its newfound vitality, as if it were a source of life and hope. Among them was Eliza, a woman who had lived her entire life in Ashridge Hollow. She stood beneath the oak, tracing the patterns in the bark with her fingertips, feeling the rough texture beneath her skin. It was as if the tree had absorbed the essence of the past, a living testament to the lives that had intersected beneath its branches. Memories flooded her mind, of childhood laughter, of stolen kisses beneath the stars, of friends long gone. As she leaned against the trunk, she closed her eyes, allowing the warmth of the sun to wash over her. The sunlight streamed through the leaves, dappling her skin with patches of gold, illuminating the hidden corners of her soul. In that moment, she could almost hear the whispers of the past, echoes of the lives that had intertwined with hers, a chorus of love and loss that had shaped her existence. Nearby, Samuel, a man with deep-set eyes and a weathered face, stood lost in thought, gazing at the oak tree. He recalled the tales his grandmother had told him of the town's history, of the love stories and tragedies that had played out beneath its branches. As a child, he had believed in the magic of those stories, but as he grew older, the harsh realities of life had dimmed that belief. Now, as the light broke through the remnants of darkness, he felt that magic stir within him once more. The townsfolk began to share glances, smiles creeping onto their faces as they exchanged unspoken acknowledgments of the night's events. They felt a connection to one another, a unity born from shared experiences and the acknowledgement of their past. Each person carried within them fragments of stories, some bright, others shrouded in sorrow, and they now understood that these stories were not merely remnants of what had been, but threads woven into the very fabric of their lives. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, a sense of urgency began to fill the air. They felt compelled to explore the corners of Ashridge Hollow, to uncover the truth that had long been buried beneath layers of fear and silence. The remnants of the past beckoned them forward, inviting them to unearth the stories that had shaped their town, to embrace the history that had been intertwined with their lives. In the heart of Ashridge Hollow lay the remnants of the old library, a building that had once stood as a beacon of knowledge and connection. Its facade was weathered, but the charm of its architecture still shone through the layers of neglect. The townsfolk approached, drawn by the warmth of the sun and the promise of discovery. The door creaked open, revealing a world where time had stood still, where books lined the shelves, their spines worn but filled with the wisdom of generations. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and leather bindings, a reminder of the countless stories that had been written within these walls. As they wandered through the aisles, fingers brushing against the spines of forgotten tomes, they felt an unspoken bond forming, a collective recognition of the power of stories to shape lives, to heal wounds, to illuminate the darkness. Eliza stepped forward, pulling a book from the shelf. The cover was faded, the title barely legible, but as she opened it, a rush of memories flooded back. The pages were filled with tales of love and loss, of triumph and despair, each word resonating with the echoes of the past. She began to read, her voice silent but reverberating in her mind, and the others gathered around her, drawn into the world of the narrative. In that moment, the library became a sanctuary, a sacred space where the townsfolk could reconnect with their roots. They shared stories of their families, of the lives that had shaped them, weaving together a tapestry of experiences that transcended time. Laughter mingled with tears as they recounted the joys and sorrows that had colored their existence, transforming the library into a living entity, pulsating with the energy of their shared histories. Outside, the sun continued its ascent, casting golden rays that spilled through the windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. The library stood as a bridge between the past and present, a reminder that the stories of Ashridge Hollow were alive and waiting to be told. With every book opened and every memory shared, the townsfolk felt the weight of their history lift, replaced by a sense of empowerment, a recognition that they held the power to shape their future. As the day unfolded, they ventured back into the town, embracing the warmth of the sunlight that now bathed Ashridge Hollow. The streets were filled with laughter, the sound of children playing and neighbors greeting one another with newfound warmth. The darkness that had once loomed over the town began to fade, replaced by a collective resilience that resonated in every heart. Eliza wandered to the edge of the town, where the field stretched out like a green sea, shimmering in the sunlight. Here, the beauty of nature unfolded before her, a stark contrast to the shadows that had haunted the hollow for so long. She felt a sense of liberation, as if the very earth was inviting her to breathe, to grow, to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. Samuel joined her, and they stood together in silence, gazing at the landscape that had shaped their lives. The rolling hills, the distant mountains, the sky that seemed to stretch on forever. It all felt different now, imbued with a sense of hope and renewal. They understood that their connection to the land was not just physical. It was spiritual, rooted in the stories of their ancestors who had tilled the soil and embraced the seasons. In that moment, a profound realization washed over them. They were not just the inhabitants of Ashridge Hollow. They were its guardians, its storytellers, its keepers of memory. The past had shaped them, but it did not define them. They had the power to weave new stories, to create a legacy that honored those who had come before while embracing the unknown future. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the landscape, the townsfolk gathered once more beneath the great oak tree. They formed a circle, hands clasped together, united in their shared experience. The warmth of their connection radiated outward, a beacon of hope that would guide them through the uncertainties that lay ahead. Eliza stepped forward, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and determination. She understood that their journey was just beginning, a journey of healing, of understanding, of reclaiming their stories. The threads of memory intertwined, forming a tapestry of resilience that would carry them forward. As night descended, the stars began to twinkle overhead, casting a shimmering light upon the town. The shadows that had once lingered seemed to retreat, not vanquished but transformed into something more profound, a reminder of the stories that had shaped their existence. The townsfolk felt the weight of the night lift, replaced by a sense of peace that enveloped them like a warm embrace. And so, beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient oak, the people of Ashridge Hollow embarked on a new chapter, one filled with the promise of renewal, the power of connection, and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Chapter 12: Silence of the Scarecrow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the twilight enveloped Ashridge Hollow in a shroud of deep indigo and violet. The air was thick with the scent of fallen leaves, and a gentle breeze whispered through the branches of the great oak tree, carrying with it the remnants of the day's warmth. The townsfolk lingered beneath its protective boughs, their hearts filled with a quiet anticipation for what the night might bring. The stars began to punctuate the night sky, twinkling like scattered diamonds, each one a reminder of the stories and lives that had shaped the fabric of Ashridge Hollow. As darkness settled in, a sense of connection deepened among the people, a recognition that they were not merely individuals but a part of something far greater, a community bound together by shared histories and collective hopes. Eliza stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart racing with the thrill of the unknown. She felt a pull toward the woods that bordered the town, the tall trees standing like ancient sentinels guarding secrets of the past. Memories flooded her mind, childhood adventures exploring those very woods, the laughter of friends echoing in the cool air, and the sense of wonder that had accompanied her every step. Drawn by an unexplainable urge, she began to walk toward the tree line, feeling the cool earth beneath her feet. The soft crunch of leaves and twigs filled the air, harmonizing with the distant rustle of the wind through the branches. With each step, the light from the gathering behind her faded, replaced by the mysterious allure of the woods that beckoned her forward. The forest loomed ahead, dark and enigmatic, but the thrill of discovery surged within her. As she entered, the canopy above thickened, casting intricate shadows on the forest floor. The world transformed, becoming a realm of muted colors and soft sounds, as if she had stepped into a dream. Eliza felt a pulse within the woods, a heartbeat that resonated with her own, drawing her deeper into its embrace. In the heart of the forest, the trees stood taller, their trunks thick and ancient, roots twisting like gnarled fingers gripping the earth. She could feel the energy radiating from them, a connection to the land that had been nurtured through the ages. The whispers of the past danced in the air, inviting her to explore the stories etched into the very essence of the woods. As she wandered deeper, a clearing opened before her, illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent mushrooms that dotted the ground. The ethereal light bathed the area in shades of blue and green, casting a surreal glow that felt both welcoming and otherworldly. In the center of the clearing stood a stone circle, ancient and weathered, its stones covered in moss and lichen, as if nature itself had claimed it as its own. Eliza stepped closer, captivated by the beauty of the circle. each stone whispering tales of rituals long forgotten. It was a place where the boundary between worlds had thinned, where the echoes of the past lingered, waiting for someone to listen. She knelt before the largest stone, feeling its cool surface beneath her fingers. A surge of energy coursed through her, a connection to the land that resonated deep within her soul. As she sat there, a vision began to unfurl before her eyes, a montage of memories that spanned generations. She saw figures dressed in clothing from eras long gone, their faces etched with emotion. They danced in the moonlight, laughter ringing through the air, their joy infectious. The scene shifted, and she watched as darkness crept into the celebration, shadows lengthening and suffocating the light, a harbinger of despair that threatened to extinguish their happiness. The visions shifted again, revealing the stories of those who had suffered, of the pain that had woven its way through the lives of the townsfolk. She witnessed the sorrow of parents mourning lost children, the heartbreak of lovers separated by circumstance, and the struggles of those who had fought against the darkness that had claimed their home. Eliza gasped as the images unfolded, feeling the weight of their grief settle upon her shoulders. Each story was a thread woven into the tapestry of Ashridge Hollow, each life a vital part of the whole. She understood now that the darkness that had descended upon the town was not merely an external force, but a manifestation of their collective pain and unhealed wounds. Tears streamed down her face as she absorbed the weight of their histories, the sacrifice and resilience that had carried them through the trials of life. In that moment, she felt a profound connection to the souls who had come before her, the stories of their lives resonating within her heart. And then, a shift occurred. The dark visions began to dissolve, replaced by flickers of light that danced across her vision. She saw the townsfolk gathering, united in their shared purpose, their laughter echoing through the air. The darkness that had once threatened to swallow them whole began to recede, illuminated by the warmth of their connections and the power of their collective hope. Eliza's heart swelled with determination. She understood that the shadows could be dispelled, but only if they embraced their stories, acknowledged their pain, and celebrated their triumphs. They had the power to rewrite the narrative of Ashridge Hollow, to create a future where light could coexist with darkness, where healing could emerge from the ashes of despair. As she rose from her kneeling position, the vision faded, but the warmth of the energy that had enveloped her remained. She felt invigorated, ready to share her newfound understanding with the townsfolk, to inspire them to reclaim their stories and step into the light. Turning away from the clearing, she retraced her steps through the woods, the bioluminescent mushrooms casting a gentle glow that guided her way. The trees whispered softly, as if encouraging her forward, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose with every step. As she emerged from the forest, the stars twinkled overhead, bright against the velvet sky, and the laughter of her neighbors drifted to her ears. The gathering had transformed into a celebration, a festival of light and life that filled the town square with warmth and joy. Lanterns hung from the branches of the oak tree, casting a soft glow that illuminated the faces of those gathered, each one a reflection of resilience and hope. Eliza stepped into the circle of light, her heart racing as she took in the scene before her. The townsfolk danced and sang, their spirits lifted, their laughter ringing out into the night. She felt the energy of the celebration wash over her, a wave of love and connection that enveloped her like a warm embrace. As she joined the dance, her heart swelled with joy, and she knew that this was just the beginning. They were not just a town. They were a community, a tapestry woven from the threads of memory and experience. Together, they would write a new story for Ashridge Hollow, one that honored the past while embracing the promise of the future. And as the stars shone brightly above, Eliza understood that the veil had lifted. The darkness that had once threatened to suffocate them was no longer an insurmountable force. It was a part of their journey, a reminder of the strength that lay within them. With every step they took toward healing, they would illuminate the path for generations to come. Chapter 13. Buried Secrets. As dawn broke over Ashridge Hollow, the light poured into the town like molten gold, spilling over rooftops and illuminating the streets. The sounds of morning stirred the townsfolk from their slumber, and the air was filled with the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from the local bakery. The warmth of the sun felt like a soft promise, a reassurance that the night's revelations were not fleeting but a harbinger of lasting change. Eliza awoke with a newfound sense of purpose, the memories of the previous night still fresh in her mind. The celebration beneath the oak tree had sparked something within her, igniting a fire that had lain dormant for too long. The stories they had shared, the connections they had forged, all of it felt like a wellspring of hope ready to burst forth. As she prepared for the day, she felt a stirring in her heart, a desire to reach out to the townsfolk, to share the insights she had gained during her journey into the woods. Each person in Ashridge Hollow held a unique story, and together, they formed the very foundation of the town. She could almost hear the whispers of the ancestors urging her on, urging the community to come together once more. Eliza stepped outside, the crisp morning air wrapping around her like a comforting shawl. The town was alive with activity, children playing in the streets, neighbors exchanging pleasantries, and the familiar rhythm of life beginning anew. She smiled, feeling the warmth of connection pulse through her as she made her way to the town square. There, the oak tree stood tall, its leaves shimmering in the morning light, a sentinel of the stories it had witnessed through the years. Eliza took a moment to appreciate its grandeur, her fingers brushing against its rough bark, as if seeking its wisdom. The town square was beginning to fill with familiar faces, and she felt a sense of urgency swell within her. But beneath the surface of this newfound joy, a sense of unease lingered. The shadows that had begun to recede were not completely vanquished. Eliza could sense a storm brewing on the horizon, a disturbance in the energy that surrounded them. It was subtle yet potent, a reminder that darkness, while diminished, was still present and lurking. As the sun climbed higher, the townsfolk gathered in the square, their laughter mingling with the sound of music and celebration. Eliza moved among them, her heart racing with excitement and trepidation. She approached Samuel, who stood at the edge of the gathering, observing the lively scene with a contemplative expression. With a gentle nudge of her shoulder against his, she urged him to share in the joy of the moment. Samuel turned to her, his eyes reflecting a blend of happiness and concern. Eliza could feel the weight of unspoken thoughts between them, a recognition that their journey was not yet complete. As the day wore on, a palpable energy infused the air, a current of excitement that surged through the townsfolk. They spoke of plans for a community festival, an event that would celebrate their resilience and the bonds that had been forged in the light of their shared stories. The idea resonated deeply within Eliza, but she knew they needed to confront the lingering shadows before moving forward. With a determined heart, she climbed atop a nearby stone pedestal, her figure silhouetted against the radiant sun. The bustling crowd began to quiet, their eyes turning toward her. The weight of their attention felt both exhilarating and daunting, but she was resolute. She needed to share what she had learned. As she began to speak without words, the rhythm of her thoughts flowed through her mind like a powerful river. She painted vivid images in her mind, conveying the importance of acknowledging the darkness they had faced, of embracing the stories that had shaped them. She urged them to confront the past, to honor the lives of those who had come before them, while also recognizing the power they held to shape their future. The townsfolk listened intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to solemn understanding. Eliza felt their energy shift, the collective heartbeat of the community resonating in response to her silent plea. They understood that the festival was not just a celebration but an opportunity for healing, a chance to embrace their stories and cast aside the shadows that still lingered. However, just as the atmosphere began to shift toward hope, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The sound was ominous, reverberating through the air like a warning bell. The once bright sky darkened, clouds gathering like an army on the horizon, threatening to blanket the town in shadow once more. The townsfolk glanced upward, their faces filled with confusion and concern as the first drops of rain began to fall. A gentle patter quickly transformed into a steady drizzle, and the joyful atmosphere shifted to one of unease. People instinctively moved closer together, seeking comfort in their shared presence as they looked toward Eliza, searching for guidance. Eliza's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the storm, not just in the sky but in the energy around them. It was a reminder that the shadows they had begun to disperse were still a force to be reckoned with. She closed her eyes, focusing on the warmth of the sun that had bathed them just moments before, and envisioned that warmth spreading through the gathering, enveloping them in a protective cocoon. The rain intensified, but the townsfolk remained steadfast, holding on to one another as the storm clouds rolled overhead. Eliza felt the pulse of their collective spirit, a reminder that they were stronger together. She opened her eyes, and within her chest, a flame ignited, an unwavering determination to face whatever darkness loomed ahead. Suddenly, a crack of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a booming clap of thunder that shook the ground beneath their feet. Panic rippled through the crowd, and Eliza raised her arms, channeling her energy into a calm, steadying presence. The townsfolk instinctively turned toward her, seeking solace in her unwavering spirit. With the storm raging overhead, Eliza focused on the memories of the lives that had come before, the strength that had surged through the generations. She envisioned the great oak tree, its roots deep in the earth, unyielding against the tempests that sought to uproot it. The image resonated within her, fueling her resolve. As the rain poured down in sheets, Eliza called forth her courage, visualizing a shield of light surrounding them, a barrier against the storm. The energy surged, and she felt the townsfolk respond, their hearts beating in unison, their collective strength rising against the darkness. In that moment, she understood that the storm was not just a physical manifestation but a representation of the trials they had faced and the challenges still to come. With every lightning flash and thunderous boom, she felt a surge of determination grow within her. The storm would not define them. They would rise above it, united in their purpose. They had the power to harness the energy of the tempest, to transform fear into strength, to stand firm against the tide. As the rain fell relentlessly, Eliza guided the townsfolk in a silent meditation, their breaths synchronized as they grounded themselves in the moment. The storm raged on, but they remained steadfast, their hearts ignited by the warmth of connection and understanding. Then, as if in response to their collective resolve, the rain began to ease, transforming from a torrential downpour to a gentle mist. The thunder grew distant, the lightning flashes receding into the horizon. Slowly, the clouds began to part, allowing rays of sunlight to break through, illuminating the town once more. A hush fell over the gathering, the air thick with anticipation as they stood together, united in their shared experience. The storm had not broken them. It had forged them anew, a reminder of the power of their connections and the resilience that lay within each of them. As the sun emerged, casting a golden hue over Ashridge Hollow, Eliza felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. They were not merely a collection of individuals, but a tapestry of stories woven together by love, loss, and hope. The darkness that had threatened them had transformed into a catalyst for growth, a reminder that they could face whatever storms lay ahead. With renewed determination, Eliza stepped forward, her heart swelling with hope. The festival would continue, not as a mere celebration, but as a symbol of their triumph over adversity. They would gather to honor the past, embrace the present, and look toward the future with courage in their hearts. As the townsfolk cheered, their spirits lifted by the promise of a new beginning, Eliza knew that this was just the beginning of their journey. The storm had revealed their strength, and together, they would illuminate the path ahead. Chapter 14. The Feast of the Dead. In the aftermath of the storm, Ashridge Hollow shimmered like a jewel, glistening under the embrace of the sun. The air was fragrant with the scent of damp earth and fresh rain, and the sky wore a brilliant blue cloak, free of the oppressive clouds that had threatened to darken their spirits. The townsfolk, buoyed by the shared experience of the storm, began to gather again, their hearts lightened and their laughter ringing through the streets. Eliza stood at the heart of the town square, observing the joy unfolding around her. The festival preparations resumed with a renewed vigor, a collective determination to celebrate their resilience and connection. Colorful banners adorned the square, their vibrant hues fluttering in the gentle breeze, and stalls were set up to showcase local crafts and produce. The spirit of the community shone brightly, illuminating the bond they shared, forged in the fires of adversity. But beneath this surface of celebration, Eliza felt a stirring unease. The storm had been a reminder of the shadows still lurking at the edges of their lives, a warning that while they had come together in unity, the darkness was not yet vanquished. She sensed it in the whispers of the wind, in the way the townsfolk occasionally glanced nervously at the horizon, as if waiting for another storm to roll in. As the day unfolded, Eliza resolved to delve deeper into the mysteries surrounding Ashridge Hollow. She wanted to understand the roots of the darkness that had seeped into their lives, to uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of their shared history. With determination in her heart, she made her way toward the edge of town, where the forest stood, its towering trees casting elongated shadows on the ground. The woods beckoned her, a familiar sanctuary that had witnessed her childhood adventures and hidden the secrets of her ancestors. She had always felt a connection to the forest, a sense that it was alive with stories waiting to be uncovered. Today, she sought not just the beauty of the natural world, but the truth that lay beneath its surface. As she stepped into the cool embrace of the trees, a sense of calm enveloped her. The rustle of leaves and the gentle chirping of birds created a soothing symphony, and she breathed deeply, allowing the essence of the forest to fill her lungs. With each step, she felt the weight of her worries lift, replaced by a sense of purpose that drove her forward. She wandered deeper into the woods, following a path that wound its way through the underbrush, leading her to a secluded glade she had discovered long ago. Sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, and she marveled at the beauty surrounding her. The tranquility of the glade felt like a balm for her soul, a momentary escape from the weight of the world. But even in this serene setting, a lingering tension hung in the air. The birds, usually vibrant and full of life, had grown silent, their absence a stark reminder of the unease that still thrummed beneath the surface. Eliza knelt beside a clear stream that flowed through the glade, its waters sparkling in the sunlight. She cupped her hands and drank deeply, feeling the coolness wash over her, refreshing and invigorating. As she gazed into the stream, she caught sight of her reflection, her features softened by the gentle ripples of water. But as she peered closer, something shifted beneath the surface. Dark shapes flickered in the depths, elusive and haunting. Eliza's heart quickened, and she leaned closer, trying to discern what lay beneath the water's surface. A shiver ran down her spine as the shapes transformed into swirling shadows, echoes of the past that had seeped into the present. They twisted and turned, forming fleeting images of sorrow and despair, lost moments, unfulfilled dreams, and the pain of those who had come before her. Each shadow carried a weight of emotion, stories that had been buried but never forgotten. Eliza's breath quickened as she felt the pull of these shadows, a connection to the lives that had been lost to time. She reached out, fingers grazing the cool water as she tried to touch the shadows, but they dissolved like mist, slipping through her grasp. It was as if the memories were too fragile to be held, yet they beckoned her to listen, to understand. The visions began to coalesce, revealing a narrative woven through the fabric of Ashridge Hollow. She saw figures from the past, families gathered around a hearth, children playing in the streets, laughter ringing through the air. But as the scenes shifted, she watched darkness creep into their lives, fear, loss, and despair taking root, leaving scars that echoed through generations. Eliza's heart ached as she bore witness to the pain that had shaped their community. The shadows spoke of sacrifices made in silence, the weight of grief that had been borne alone. She realized that the darkness they faced was not just an external force, but a culmination of the pain that had lingered, unacknowledged and unhealed. Suddenly, a vision broke through the swirling shadows, an image of a woman standing beneath the great oak tree, her eyes filled with sorrow as she clutched a faded photograph. Eliza felt a pang of recognition as she realized this woman was her ancestor, a guardian of stories untold. The woman seemed to beckon her closer, urging her to listen, to uncover the truth hidden beneath layers of time. With a determined heart, Eliza closed her eyes and allowed the visions to wash over her, immersing herself in the stories of those who had come before. She felt their pain, their longing for connection and understanding, and she understood that it was her duty to carry their stories forward. The shadows were not to be feared but embraced, a part of the tapestry of life that made them whole. As she opened her eyes, the sunlight danced through the trees, illuminating the glade with a warm, golden glow. The shadows that had haunted her began to recede, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. Eliza knew that she had to share what she had witnessed, to invite the townsfolk to confront their own shadows and embrace the stories that had shaped them. Leaving the glade behind, she made her way back to Ashridge Hollow, the urgency of her mission propelling her forward. As she stepped into the town square, she felt a wave of energy wash over her, a blend of excitement and apprehension as she prepared to share the revelations that had unfolded within her. The festival had transformed into a vibrant tapestry of color and sound, laughter mingling with the music that filled the air. The townsfolk moved about, their spirits lifted, but Eliza sensed an undercurrent of tension that mirrored her own. They had come together in celebration, yet the shadows of the past loomed just beneath the surface. With a heart full of determination, she climbed back onto the stone pedestal, her presence commanding the attention of those gathered. She felt their eyes upon her, a blend of curiosity and concern as they awaited her words. Eliza's heart raced as she prepared to share the stories she had unearthed, the importance of facing their past to illuminate their future. With each breath, she centered herself, channeling the energy of the ancestors who had called to her from the depths of the shadows. She envisioned the great oak tree, its roots anchoring them to the earth, reminding them that they were all interconnected, bound by the stories of their lives. And as the festival swirled around her, Eliza began to weave a narrative of hope, courage, and resilience, inviting her fellow townsfolk to embrace their shadows and celebrate the tapestry of life that had brought them together. Chapter 15. Echoes of the Unburied. As dusk settled over Ashridge Hollow, the festival illuminated the town like a constellation of stars, vibrant lights twinkling against the night sky. Laughter and music filled the air, mingling with the scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider. The joyous atmosphere, a stark contrast to the shadows Eliza had encountered earlier, wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Yet beneath the surface of this celebration, a current of unease still pulsed, a reminder of the unaddressed past. Eliza stood on the stone pedestal, her heart racing as she prepared to share her discoveries with the townsfolk. They had gathered around her, their faces illuminated by the flickering lanterns, eyes reflecting a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the hope that the festival would be a turning point in their community's journey. Drawing a deep breath, she began to weave the tapestry of stories she had unearthed in the forest. With every wordless expression, she conjured images of the past, the whispers of ancestors echoing in her mind. She shared the tale of the woman beneath the oak tree, her sorrow palpable, a connection that transcended time. The townsfolk listened intently, their expressions shifting as they grasped the gravity of her revelations. As Eliza spoke, she felt the energy in the square shift, a transformation sparked by the recognition of shared pain and resilience. The air vibrated with an electric hum, the stories intertwining with the present moment, binding them all together in a collective understanding. But just as she felt the community drawing closer, a chill swept through the square, a reminder that the shadows were not easily dismissed. The first threads of darkness began to unravel, creeping in from the periphery. A sharp wind gusted, extinguishing several lanterns and causing the festive decorations to flutter violently. The laughter that had filled the air faltered, replaced by a hushed murmur of confusion and concern. Eliza felt the change instantly, a wave of apprehension washing over her as she sensed the unease rippling through the crowd. Just then, a shadow darted at the edge of her vision, slipping between the stalls and disappearing into the darkness. Her heart raced as she scanned the perimeter, a sinking feeling settling in her chest. It was as if the shadows were alive, stirred by the very act of confronting them. The atmosphere, once filled with celebration, turned heavy, laden with an unspoken tension that hung in the air like a dark cloud. Determined not to let fear take hold, Eliza refocused her energy on the townsfolk gathered before her. She projected her thoughts outward, a silent plea for unity and courage, reminding them of the power they held when they faced their fears together. The flickering lights of the festival seemed to respond to her energy, reigniting with a warm glow as if the very fabric of their community was weaving itself tighter. But as the night deepened, the shadows grew bolder. Eliza could feel them swirling just beyond the edges of the celebration, a dark mass watching, waiting. The joyous laughter of the townsfolk was punctuated by sudden gusts of wind that whipped through the square, rattling the decorations and sending a chill coursing through the crowd. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide with fear, and the once vibrant atmosphere began to dim. Eliza's heart pounded as she sensed the encroaching darkness. She knew she had to confront it head-on, to guide her fellow townsfolk through this unsettling moment. With resolve hardening within her, she stepped down from the pedestal, moving toward the edge of the square where the shadows seemed most concentrated. The crowd parted as she approached, their expressions a mixture of fear and curiosity. Eliza could feel the energy shift around her, the air crackling with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, grounding her thoughts in the light she had cultivated within. She envisioned the oak tree once more, its roots deep in the earth, unwavering against the forces that sought to uproot it. As she opened her eyes, she reached deep within herself, channeling the stories of her ancestors, the strength they had shown in times of darkness. With each step, she drew upon the energy of the festival, the laughter and joy that had filled the square moments before. She felt it surge through her, a powerful force ready to push back against the shadows. The wind howled as she reached the perimeter, and the shadows coalesced into a swirling mass, their forms indistinct but palpably sinister. Eliza stood firm, feeling the weight of the townsfolk behind her, their collective energy fueling her resolve. She extended her hands, palms facing outward, visualizing a barrier of light emerging from her, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. In that moment, the shadows hesitated, swirling uncertainly as if sensing the strength of her conviction. Eliza focused, projecting her energy with all her might, drawing upon the light of the festival and the warmth of the community gathered around her. The air thickened with tension, and she could feel the struggle between light and dark intensifying. As the first rays of light broke through the darkness, illuminating the swirling shadows, a palpable shift occurred. The mass of darkness began to tremble, shrinking away from the light as if it were being scorched. Eliza's heart raced, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She knew that the confrontation with the shadows was not just about expelling them but understanding their purpose. Suddenly, the shadows recoiled, retreating into the recesses of the night, leaving behind an eerie stillness. The air grew quiet, as if the world held its breath. Eliza took a step back, her heart pounding as she scanned the square. The townsfolk stood in stunned silence, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. Then, as if released from a spell, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. The lanterns flickered back to life, casting a warm glow across the square. Laughter erupted, timid at first but quickly swelling into a triumphant chorus. Eliza felt the energy shift once more, a wave of relief washing over her as the darkness retreated. But even in the midst of their celebration, Eliza understood that this victory was only the beginning. The shadows may have receded for now, but they would return, for they were woven into the very fabric of their lives. She felt a sense of urgency rise within her, a call to action. They could not simply celebrate. They had to confront the darkness together, to weave their stories into a collective narrative that acknowledged both joy and sorrow. As the townsfolk began to gather around her once more, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the lanterns, Eliza knew that she had to guide them. They needed to explore the depths of their shared history, to face the shadows that lingered and honor the stories that had shaped them. With newfound determination, she called upon the spirit of the festival, urging them to embrace the journey ahead. They would gather their strength, confront the shadows lurking beneath the surface, and emerge not just as individuals but as a united community, ready to illuminate the path forward. As the night wore on, the festivities resumed with a renewed vigor. Music filled the air, and laughter echoed through the square, a testament to their resilience and unity. The festival had transformed into a celebration of hope, a collective affirmation that they would face whatever came next together. And deep within her heart, Eliza knew that the journey was far from over. The unraveling threads of their past had only just begun, and with every step they took, they would weave a brighter future, one filled with understanding, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of community. Chapter 16. When Darkness Hungers. As dawn broke over Ashridge Hollow, the first rays of sunlight spilled through the trees, casting a golden glow over the remnants of the night's festivities. The laughter and music from the festival lingered in the air like a distant echo, a bittersweet reminder of the triumph they had shared. But beneath the surface of their victory, a sense of unease settled in. The shadows they had confronted had not been vanquished. They had merely retreated, and Eliza could feel the tension mounting as the town prepared for what lay ahead. The vibrant colors of the festival decorations now stood in stark contrast to the growing unease that enveloped the town. Eliza walked through the square, the remnants of the celebration strewn about her like forgotten dreams. Lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, their flickering light still a testament to the joy that had filled the air just hours before. Yet the atmosphere had shifted, a weight pressing down on her chest, urging her to act. She knew that the darkness was far from gone. It had merely withdrawn to gather strength, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Determined not to let fear take hold, Eliza resolved to rally her fellow townsfolk once more, to forge a path forward that acknowledged both their joy and the shadows that lurked in the corners of their lives. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Eliza called for a gathering at the heart of the town. Word spread quickly, and soon the townsfolk began to assemble, drawn by an unspoken need to come together in the face of uncertainty. She stood at the center of the square, her heart pounding as she watched them gather, their faces reflecting a mix of hope and apprehension. Eliza took a deep breath, drawing strength from the memories of the ancestors who had guided her through the shadows. She envisioned the stories woven into the fabric of their community, threads of resilience and courage that had withstood the test of time. With every passing moment, she felt the weight of her responsibility grow, and she understood that it was time to face the truths they had long avoided. As the townsfolk settled around her, Eliza began to share her vision, a vision of a gathering that would honor their past while empowering them to confront the darkness. She spoke of the need to acknowledge the shadows that had haunted Ashridge Hollow, to listen to the stories that had been buried beneath layers of pain and loss. She felt the energy shift in the square, an undercurrent of solidarity and determination building among them. However, just as she felt the momentum swell, a chill gusted through the square, sending a shiver down her spine. The laughter and chatter that had filled the air faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Eliza's gaze darted to the horizon, where dark clouds loomed ominously, swirling in a chaotic dance. The atmosphere crackled with electricity, and she felt the familiar weight of foreboding settle around her. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, their faces reflecting the growing concern. The joy of the festival had been replaced by a palpable tension, a collective realization that they were once again on the precipice of something dark and unknown. Eliza's heart raced as she sensed the shadows gathering once more, the remnants of the storm coalescing into a new, ominous force. The wind howled through the square, a haunting reminder of the power that lay beyond their control. Eliza could feel the pull of the darkness, a magnetic force drawing her toward the unknown. It was as if the very fabric of Ashridge Hollow was being tested, and she knew that they had to confront it together. With determination etched on her face, Eliza raised her hands, urging the townsfolk to gather their strength. She called upon the spirit of unity that had emerged during the festival, reminding them of the power they held when they stood together. The shadows may have been formidable, but so too was their collective light. As she looked into the faces of her neighbors, she felt a surge of hope. They were not alone. They had each other, and together they could forge a path through the darkness. The town's history, filled with stories of resilience and courage, was a testament to their strength. They had faced challenges before, and now was the time to embrace the fight that lay ahead. Just then, a low rumble echoed through the air, reverberating like a warning bell. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Eliza steadied herself, her heart racing as she realized that the storm was not just a natural phenomenon. It was a manifestation of the darkness they had sought to confront. The shadows were rising, and they were gathering strength for a final confrontation. As the dark clouds swirled ominously above, Eliza led the townsfolk in a collective breath, a deep inhalation that connected them to the land and each other. They closed their eyes, grounding themselves in the moment, drawing upon the energy of their ancestors, the stories that had shaped them. They were more than a collection of individuals. They were a community bound by shared history and the will to face whatever lay ahead. With renewed purpose, Eliza stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the swirling clouds. The wind whipped around her, but she stood firm, feeling the weight of the town behind her. She understood that the storm would not be easily dismissed. It was a reflection of their collective fears, the darkness they had harbored within, and now it was time to confront it head-on. In that moment, the skies darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall, each drop a reminder of the storms that had come before. The townsfolk raised their heads, eyes fixed on Eliza, their expressions resolute. They understood the gravity of the situation. This was their moment to stand united against the gathering storm. As the wind howled and the rain fell harder, Eliza felt the shadows coalescing around them, a swirling mass of despair and uncertainty. But she also felt the light within each of her neighbors, a warmth that pushed back against the darkness. She knew that together they could weave a tapestry of hope, a shield against the storm that sought to tear them apart. With determination in her heart, Eliza stepped forward once more, calling upon the spirit of Ashridge Hollow. The stories of those who had come before, the strength of their community, and the courage that had always defined them. The storm may rage, but they would not yield. They would face the darkness as one, their hearts intertwined in a shared purpose. The winds howled in defiance, but Eliza's spirit remained unbroken. The storm had come to test them, to force them to confront their deepest fears. But she believed in the power of their unity, in the strength that lay within their shared stories. As the darkness loomed overhead, Eliza raised her hands to the sky, a silent prayer for strength and resilience. The townsfolk joined her, a powerful wave of energy building around them as they stood firm against the tempest. Together, they would face the gathering storm, uniting their light against the shadows that threatened to consume them. In that moment, Eliza felt a surge of hope. The storm would come, but so too would the dawn. They were ready to confront whatever lay ahead, bound by the stories that had shaped them and the promise of a brighter future. Chapter 17. A Hollowed Heart. The storm surged around Ashridge Hollow, a chaotic dance of wind and rain that seemed determined to erase the vibrant tapestry of the town. Dark clouds roiled overhead, swirling like a living entity, and the sound of thunder reverberated through the air, relentless drumbeat heralding the tempest. Eliza stood resolute at the heart of the square, surrounded by her neighbors, a bastion of light against the encroaching darkness. As the wind howled, she could feel the raw energy pulsing through the storm, a force that mirrored the turmoil within the townsfolk. Fear and uncertainty threatened to unravel the unity they had forged. Yet, as she stood there, rooted in her resolve, she sensed an undercurrent of strength rising from the crowd. Together, they would face whatever the storm unleashed. The rain fell in torrents, drenching the square, each drop a reminder of the shadows they had confronted. Eliza closed her eyes, grounding herself in the moment, focusing on the warmth of her neighbor's presence. She envisioned their shared stories intertwining, a protective web that held them together against the forces that sought to tear them apart. As the winds howled louder, a sudden stillness enveloped the square, an eerie calm that preceded the eye of the storm. Eliza opened her eyes, scanning the horizon where the swirling clouds momentarily parted to reveal a circle of clarity. In that moment, she understood that they stood at a precipice, a moment of reckoning that could either fracture their unity or solidify it. The townsfolk, sensing the shift, turned their gaze toward Eliza, their expressions a mix of determination and trepidation. In the eye of the storm, they could see the remnants of the celebration, the colors of the festival, the remnants of laughter, the flickering lights struggling against the encroaching darkness. It was a reflection of their journey, a reminder that joy and sorrow coexisted, and it was their choice how to navigate this tumultuous path. Eliza took a deep breath, her heart steadying as she felt the collective energy of the crowd. This was not just about her anymore. It was about every soul in Ashridge Hollow. Together, they had faced darkness before, and together they could face it again. She felt the power of their shared history surge within her, a deep well of resilience that would guide them through the storm. As the eye of the storm passed overhead, the winds began to shift once more, swirling in a violent frenzy. The darkness that had retreated was now poised to strike, more ferocious than before. The first crack of lightning illuminated the square, casting eerie shadows that danced across the faces of the townsfolk. Fear flickered in their eyes, but Eliza stood tall, feeling the strength of their bond pulsing around her like a heartbeat. Without words, she raised her hands toward the darkening sky, a silent call for unity. The townsfolk responded instinctively, drawing closer, forming a circle around her. Their hands intertwined, creating a living chain of strength and solidarity. In that moment, they became a fortress against the storm, a symbol of resilience that radiated warmth amidst the encroaching cold. The winds howled again, a mournful wail that echoed their fears. The rain lashed against their faces, stinging like tiny daggers, but Eliza remained resolute, her heart beating in time with the rhythm of the storm. She could feel the energy shifting, a palpable tension in the air as they prepared to face the darkness that lay beyond the eye. As the tempest unleashed its fury, Eliza closed her eyes once more, channeling the collective strength of her neighbors. She envisioned the stories they had shared, the struggles they had faced, and the triumphs that had united them. Each pulse of energy was a reminder of their resilience, an unbreakable thread that connected them to one another and to the land they called home. In the heart of the storm, the shadows began to swirl, taking shape around the edges of their circle. They were manifestations of their deepest fears: loss, despair, isolation. Each shadow writhed and twisted, threatening to envelop them, but Eliza focused on the light within her. She envisioned it expanding outward, a radiant barrier that pushed against the darkness. The shadows recoiled, and for a brief moment, Eliza felt a flicker of hope. But the darkness was relentless, swirling with renewed ferocity. The storm raged on, a cacophony of sound and fury that sought to tear them apart. The townsfolk held tight to one another, their expressions resolute, refusing to let the shadows win. Eliza opened her eyes and caught the gaze of each neighbor, finding strength in their resolve. They were not merely facing the storm. They were embracing it, drawing upon its energy, transforming their fears into a powerful force that could push back against the darkness. In that moment, they became more than individuals. They were a collective spirit, a living testament to the power of community. With each breath, Eliza guided the energy flowing between them, weaving it into a protective shield. She imagined the light illuminating their shared history, illuminating the path forward through the chaos. The storm was fierce, but it could not extinguish the fire burning within them. As the shadows surged forward, Eliza raised her arms, calling upon the strength of their ancestors, the stories that had shaped their community. She could feel the energy swirling around her, a torrent of light pushing against the encroaching darkness. The shadows writhed and twisted, but they began to falter, retreating from the collective force of the townsfolk's resolve. With one final surge of energy, Eliza unleashed the power within her, a wave of light radiating outward like a beacon in the night. The shadows hesitated, momentarily stunned by the brilliance that engulfed them. The storm's fury began to wane, the winds shifting as the energy of the community pushed back against the darkness. The first rays of dawn began to break through the clouds, illuminating the square with a golden light. The storm's grip loosened, and the shadows receded, fading into the recesses of the night. Eliza and the townsfolk stood together, their hands still clasped, hearts racing as they witnessed the transformation unfolding before them. The tempest had been fierce, but they had emerged stronger, united in their resolve. As the sun began to rise, casting warm light across Ashridge Hollow, Eliza felt a sense of hope blossoming within her. The darkness had been a test, a reminder that they could confront their fears together, and now they stood at the brink of a new beginning. As the storm clouds dissipated, the townsfolk cheered, their voices rising in celebration, a chorus of triumph echoing through the square. Eliza smiled, feeling the warmth of their unity envelop her like a protective embrace. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not just as individuals, but as a community bound by shared stories and resilience. In that moment, she understood the power of their journey. They were no longer merely survivors of the storm. They were champions of their own narratives, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Together, they would continue to weave their stories, honoring both the light and the shadows that had shaped their lives. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Eliza felt a deep sense of gratitude for the bonds that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. The journey was far from over, but they had taken a significant step toward healing, understanding that they could weather any storm as long as they stood together. Chapter 18. The Last Breath of the Night. With the storm's fury finally quelled, Ashridge Hollow emerged into a new dawn, a soft light washing over the town like a balm for the weary. The remnants of the tempest lingered in the air. Raindrops clung to leaves and rooftops, glistening in the morning sun like jewels. Eliza stood in the square, surrounded by her neighbors, the weight of the night's battle slowly lifting as they took in the transformed landscape. The once tumultuous sky now opened up to a breathtaking panorama of vibrant colors, the sun breaking through the last remnants of dark clouds. Hues of pink and orange blended into a canvas of soft blues, illuminating the town and revealing the scars left by the storm. The air was fresh and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of renewal. As the townsfolk began to stir, Eliza felt a surge of gratitude wash over her. They had stood united against the darkness, and now, as the sun rose, it illuminated not just their surroundings, but the strength that had blossomed within each of them. There was a new energy in the air, a spirit of resilience that seemed to echo through the square. Eliza watched as her neighbors moved about, some kneeling to inspect the remnants of the festival decorations, others helping one another clear debris. Laughter began to bubble up, breaking the silence that had hung in the air just moments before. It was a sound she had longed to hear, a melody that signified the return of hope. Together, they began to clean the square, removing the remnants of their celebration intermingled with the debris left behind by the storm. Eliza joined them, picking up fallen lanterns and strewn ribbons, each item a reminder of the joy they had shared and the struggle they had faced. The process felt cathartic, a way to honor their journey while preparing for the next chapter of their lives. As they worked, Eliza noticed something new in the faces around her. There was a deep understanding of the importance of community, a recognition that their stories were interwoven in ways they had not fully appreciated before. Each laugh, each shared glance, became a thread in the tapestry of their town, reinforcing the bond they had forged in adversity. Amidst the chaos of cleanup, Eliza's thoughts wandered back to the ancestors who had watched over Ashridge Hollow. Their spirits lingered in the corners of the town, woven into the very fabric of the land. She felt their presence, a silent encouragement urging her to continue the work they had begun. The town had a history of resilience, and it was now their responsibility to carry that legacy forward. As the morning wore on, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the square. Eliza took a moment to step back, observing the townsfolk as they came together, sharing stories of their own encounters with the storm, their own fears and triumphs. Each tale was a testament to their strength, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles. The cleaning process turned into an impromptu gathering, laughter and stories weaving a fabric of connection among them. Eliza listened intently as a neighbor recounted how she had sheltered her children during the storm, finding comfort in the familiar tales of their ancestors. Another shared how the festival had brought them joy just before the tempest, a beacon of light that had illuminated their lives even in the darkest of times. Eliza felt the warmth of their words wrap around her like a comforting embrace, a reminder that every story mattered, every experience a vital part of the community's history. They were building a new narrative, one forged in the fires of adversity, a tale of resilience that would inspire future generations. As they finished cleaning, Eliza suggested they gather in the center of the square once more, and the townsfolk readily agreed. They formed a circle, hands clasped together, a visual representation of their unity. Eliza felt a sense of purpose swell within her, a deep-seated belief that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, as long as they did so together. In that moment of silence, the world around them faded away, and all that remained was the bond they had created. Eliza closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the warmth of the sun on her face and the energy of her neighbors surrounding her. She envisioned the future of Ashridge Hollow, a place where stories were shared, where laughter filled the air, and where darkness could be faced with unwavering courage. As she opened her eyes, a sense of determination surged within her. They had faced the storm and emerged victorious, but it was up to them to ensure that their story continued. They needed to nurture the bonds they had formed, to foster a spirit of connection that would withstand the test of time. Eliza's heart swelled with pride as she looked around at the familiar faces, each one a pillar of strength in their own right. They were more than just a community. They were a family bound by shared experiences and a commitment to one another. And in that moment, she realized that their journey had only just begun. With a renewed sense of purpose, Eliza took a deep breath and began to speak silently, her heart filled with gratitude for the lessons learned. She envisioned a future where the townsfolk would continue to gather, where their stories would intertwine, creating a vibrant tapestry of resilience and hope. The shadows may always linger, but they would not define them. Their light would shine brighter than ever. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a warm glow over Ashridge Hollow, Eliza felt a sense of peace wash over her. They had faced the storm together, and now they would embrace the dawn of a new day. The path ahead may be uncertain, but with each other by their side, they would navigate the challenges that awaited them. In the heart of the town, surrounded by the warmth of community, Eliza understood that the real magic of Ashridge Hollow lay in its stories. They were threads of light woven into the darkness, and as long as they continued to share them, the spirit of resilience would endure. As the townsfolk began to disperse, laughter ringing out in the air, Eliza knew that this was just the beginning. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger, but the journey of healing and connection was ongoing. Together, they would continue to forge their path, crafting a legacy of hope that would echo through the generations. And as she turned to walk home, Eliza felt a renewed sense of purpose blooming within her. The storm had come and gone, but the heart of Ashridge Hollow remained, pulsing with life, light, and the unbreakable spirit of its people. The story of their resilience was far from over. It was only just beginning.